Who are these people?
Time for Fuck Israel. Reef said that I should actually ask Jesse Jet to make me a Fuck Israel little intro vignette thing so that I can play that every time he had started to do some lounge music. I wasn't thrilled with that, but it would be funny to have something because we do have to do this segment every week. And I've got a few things that are just absolutely fucking horrific. So we'll start with Professor Asal Rod. She's outstanding independent journalist as well. She loves to correct the headlines in corporate media. And apparently the orders went out last week. And we're going to talk a little bit about this story. But Israeli forces kill 2 Palestinians after they appear to surrender. And there was a lot of coverage about this. I'm pretty sure I brought an article that actually details what happened here. This was in Jenin in the West Bank. Remember, there's no Hamas here. This is the West Bank. So they surrendered. You can see the video clearly. They have their hands in the air. Soldiers are behind them. They kick them, and then they shoot them in the back, and they kill them. But the orders went out to corporate media. But for some reason, they appeared to surrender. They didn't appear to surrender. No, they fucking surrendered. But somehow Reuters, the BBC, the New York Times, they all, for some reason, it appeared to surrender. WAPO, too. Fuck all you guys. This is why corporate media is garbage. Right? To cast doubt. 2 Palestinians were executed in Jenin this morning. All right. After surrendering, none of the soldiers flinched. Business as usual. Here it is. They order them to get back under the thing. And as they're climbing back under, they shoot them. Then they put their hands up like, what do you mean? What happened? Then they use their heavy equipment to pull the door right down on top of them, just in case they weren't already dead. And there's still guns drawn as if these guys are going to pop up and shoot them. Out of their fucking minds, these people. Unspooled. All right. Fuck Israel. All right. But on top of that, this is one you probably didn't hear. The IDF also murdered 2 kids in Khan Yunis. That's in Gaza. That's inside Gaza. Wait, isn't there supposed to be a ceasefire happening? Huh? The Israeli army continued its violations of the declared ceasefire in the Gaza Strip, killing 2 Palestinian siblings, both are children, and bombarding several areas of the devastated coastal enclave. Medical sources in Bani Sohelia, east of Khan Yunis, reported that Israeli forces opened heavy fire on displaced Palestinians, killing 2 children instantly. But if there was a ceasefire, how could they open heavy fire? Oh, right, because they don't really adhere to a ceasefire. Sources confirmed that the victims were among families who had already fled earlier bombardments and were sheltering in makeshift tents, because everybody was. The 2 slain children have been identified as Tamer and Bis' brother Tamer and his brother Tamer Abu Aasi. They were killed near the Al-Farabi school in Bani Sohelia. I saw Mossab Abu Toha also share this. The Israeli Air Force also launched massive missile strikes while artillery units fired shells at neighborhoods east of Khan Yunis. But again, ceasefire, right, guys? In addition, Israeli Navy vessels opened fire on displaced Palestinians near the shore of Rafah, Gaza's southernmost city. Why? Forcing hundreds to scatter from the beaches where they had sought refuge. And we saw the tents lined up on the beaches. Civil defense crews reported difficulty reaching the wounded due to the ongoing shelling and destruction of access roads. Well, that makes sense. Local rights groups condemned the attacks as part of a systemic campaign to terrorize displaced civilians, noting that the strikes deliberately targeted areas known to be overcrowded with families who'd already lost their homes. Since the quote-unquote ceasefire was announced on October 11th, and this is why I brought this, Israeli forces have murdered 354 Palestinians and injured another 900 others almost, while rescue teams have recovered 605 bodies from beneath the rubble of destroyed buildings. According to the Palestinian Ministry of Health in Gaza, Al Jazeera and English, Arabic, and independent outlets and human rights groups, the overall toll of the genocide in Gaza has been deeply minimized and reached at least 69,733 Palestinians killed and more than 170,863 Palestinians injured, the majority of whom are children and women. Except we know both of those numbers are substantially higher. Like in the hundreds of thousands higher. Thousands remain missing under collapsed buildings, with civil defense crews warning that the true number of victims is likely even higher by a lot. On top of the mass graves, on top of the 10,000 Palestinian hostages, yes, hostages, that Israel is holding prisoner without charge somewhere in a torture camp. Fuck Israel. All right, now we're also going to go back to Indie Media Award honoree Popular Resistance. This one is no surprise, but also no less disgusting. From the Adala Legal Center, okay, that over 30 new laws have been enacted since October 7th to further entrench apartheid. Over the past 2 years, the Israeli Knesset has passed dozens of new laws, the cumulative effect of which is to further entrench and deepen Israel's regime of apartheid and repression over all Palestinians under its control, both in Israel, and in the occupied territories. All of Israel is the occupied territory, but that's another story. Adala's new report, okay, what a surprise, we're now getting hiccups on bandwidth, I see. Great. Adala's new report, post 7th October, a new wave of anti-Palestinian Israeli laws, reviews key legislation passed between October 7th, 2023 and July 27th of this year. The laws span multiple themes, including freedom of expression, protest and thought, the right to citizenship and family life, equality and social rights, and the rights of detainees and prisoners, which we know Israel believes they have none. These new laws fundamentally violate the human rights of Palestinians, yet nobody in the international community says or does shit. While the state has legitimized these new laws by the wartime political climate that they created, that they invented, this legislation is rooted in Israel's constitutional structure based on Jewish ethno-national supremacy, which in many instances amounts to separate legal systems for Jewish Israelis and Palestinians. That's apartheid. The laws reflect and are the manifestation of the 2018 Basic Law, Jewish nation state, This is as this new government declared in its guiding principles, quote, so disgusting. The Jewish people have an exclusive and inalienable right over all areas of the land of Israel, unquote. Sounds genocidal to me. Since October 7th, 2023, Israeli authorities have used the war, quote unquote, again, it's not a war with no, if they're not fighting back, to accelerate these trends and consolidate Jewish ethno-national supremacy on a broader scale. This new report builds on Adallah's October 2024 position paper, which reviewed 8 bills, most of which were later enacted into laws. What a surprise. The laws were covered in these reports to join the laws already documented in Adallah's discriminatory laws database, bringing the total to about 100 discriminatory laws. Imagine in this country if there were 100 laws on the books right now that were discriminatory against Native Americans. Because that's the comparison you need to draw here, where we've stolen their land, pushed them further and further into smaller places, and then said that they can't operate in XYZ. And I guarantee you, Inhumans of late-stage capitalism is probably screaming at their computer at me right now, going, that's exactly what they fucking done. They freed Leonard Peltier earlier this year, but that is exactly what they fucking done. But imagine that in 2025, we were passing new laws to further persecute and create an apartheid state against Native Americans who have their poor community outside of the casinos and the land that they own, but they're not doing well financially compared to the rest of a lot of other communities. So to go after them, why? Like, it's either racism, it's punitive, it's bullying, it's imperialistic, and it's disgusting in every way, shape, and form. The report identifies key legislative trends. First, it documents the new amendments and the expanded use of the counterterrorism framework, which in practice is applied almost exclusively to Palestinian citizens of Israel and Palestinian residents of East Jerusalem. Except we've seen all of the Israeli residents that have the settlers that have terrorized Issa Amro's house, for example, that have gone through the streets with pogroms led by Ben Gvir and terrorized Palestinians living there. The vague definitions of terrorist act, quote unquote, and terror organization in the 2016 counterterrorism law and the subsequent amendments have become key tools for suppressing Palestinians' freedom of expression, especially since October of 2023. Another trend channels enormous state resources for Jewish Israeli reservists into new privileges, tax, welfare, higher education, employment benefits that by their nature exclude Palestinian citizens of Israel. The report also, and again, why there's any Palestinians that would want to live peacefully alongside Israelis in that land where they're already given second-class status. They're not actually given citizenship. They're not given right of return. They're just allowed to live there until the IDF decides they want to take their house. The report also highlights the institutionalization of temporary emergency measures, repeatedly renewed or made permanent, enabling widespread violations of detainees' rights and punitive conditions against Palestinian prisoners held in Israeli custody. Why are we tolerating this? Why is the world tolerating this? Well, this was never the plan. At least I didn't think that was the plan. Right? The report also concludes that the Israeli legislature is consolidating a dual legal regime that privileges Jewish Israelis while systematically violating Palestinians' rights. However, unlike historical systems of racial or religious supremacy, such as the apartheid South Africa or Jim Crow South in the U.S., Most of the Israeli laws cited in the report use neutral legal language. Their legislative history and application, however, demonstrate the systematic targeting of Palestinians. So it can be applied universally if they want to, but they're only applying it to Palestinians. These laws criminalize legitimate political expression, authorize deportations of Palestinian families to where I don't know, block Palestinian family unification, permit the dismissal of Palestinian teachers, revoke Palestinian families' social welfare benefits if their minor children are convicted of what's characterized as security offenses. Of course, Israel gets to determine what those offenses are and if they committed them unilaterally with no trial or any kind of process, including stone throwing. Against a soldier that's holding an assault rifle. Expand detention powers and prolong detention. Restrict access to legal counsel and close independent media outlets, because God forbid anybody got the real story out, right? They violate both Israel's constitutional principles, not that they actually care, and its obligations under international treaties, which they also don't care about, and other countries aren't holding them accountable to. In the occupied Palestinian territory, they further breach Israel's duties under international humanitarian law because they are responsible for the welfare, well-being, and health of the Palestinian people in those territories as well. It's wow. The report references that July 2024 International Court of Justice advisory opinion, which found that Israel's prolonged occupation is illegal and that discriminatory legislation constitutes a breach of the prohibition on racial segregation and apartheid under Article 3 of the International Convention of Elimination of All Forms of Racial Discrimination, the CERD. All right. I thought Israel had signed off on that, but you can wipe your ass with the treaties that they've actually signed off on and agreed to, because they're not adhering to any of it. And again, there's no accountability for it. There should be a full blockade of Israel right now, because they're already doing it to the Palestinian people. Why should the Israeli people be able to have goods flow freely? It also situates these new laws within Israel's ongoing genocide in Gaza, including measures restricting UNRWA operations and humanitarian aid, directly violating the ICJ's provisional measures in the South Africa v. Israel case. And we saw that the guy who used to run the IDF, who used to run Unit 8200, he admitted that he had done like a blackmail for hire. A campaign, a smear campaign coordinated against the ICJ. Other laws, such as the Unlawful Combatants Law, enable arbitrary detention and enforce disappearances, contributing to the systematic repression of Palestinians detained in Israel from Gaza. The closure of media outlets, again, such as Al Jazeera, serves to conceal atrocities and prevent scrutiny of state violence, and allow them to control the narrative. Adalah also documents additional pending bills, many of which are currently before the Knesset in its session that began at the end of October, that would even further erode democratic participation and equality. They're just ripping the mask off. There's nothing democratic about them, except what they call themselves. These pending bills would expand the grounds for disqualifying Arab Knesset parties and candidates, bar the employment of teachers holding degrees from Palestinian academic institutions. They'd be able to dismiss university staff based on political views. That's already happening here. Fuck Israel for that. Entrench West Bank annexation through jurisdictional changes. Fuck that. And tax foreign government funding to human rights NGOs, among others, which further discourages human rights NGOs from funding this stuff. A separate bill, and Reef and Colin covered this a couple of weeks ago on INN News, mandates the death penalty for killing an Israeli citizen out of, quote, racism or hostility toward the public, unquote. aiming to harm the state of Israel and the revival of the Jewish people in its homeland, unquote. Even if it's your homeland first that they're stealing. Taken together, these legislative initiatives reveal that this Israeli government and parliament continue to act in defiance of the state's constitutional commitments and international law, whatever that means, reinforcing a regime of apartheid and deepening the denial of Palestinian collective and individual rights. Netanyahu does not want to acknowledge that a Palestinian even exists. So yeah, agreed with all of that. Fuck Israel. I also brought an article from another Indie Media Award honoree, Ricky, over at Council Estate Media. Okay. Google Trends. Now, this one's crazy. Now, I don't know if everybody was paying attention to what was going on during the holidays, but there was this DC shooter, an Afghani guy shot two National Guardsmen in DC, one of whom ended up dying. And turns out he had worked with CIA in Afghanistan when he was a teenager. They had brought him here, and there was a lot of smoke there. But here's the thing. This is weird. Google Trends for DC and Tel Aviv expose another CIA Mossad assassination? What? In a weird coincidence, Google data shows that someone searched for Ramanullah Lakanwal before he carried out the shooting of two National Guardsmen in D.C. on November 26th. How is that possible? The below data shows that on November 25th, there was a spike in searches in the District of Columbia, where D.C. is located. There were smaller numbers of searches the following day. And again, that's the 26th. But why were people searching here and here on the 25th for his name? That's not exactly a popular name. These figures don't show the number of searches performed, but rather a popularity score assigned by Google from 0 to 100. The spike prior to the shooting was given the maximum score of 100 right there. Interestingly, there's a similar spike from Israel, I wonder why, with a score of just over 50. Again, that's before the shooting happened. You might think, and that's a great song by the Cars, but you might think it's crazy. All I Want Is You. You might think this is perfectly normal search activity, but you would be wrong. Long-term searches show no data, scores of 0 for months or years at a time, and then sudden spikes with scores of 100. For example, we found spikes in Israel and the UK around the same time in 2023 and 2024. Remember, these things can be planned way in advance, and they can involve multiple intelligence agencies. Here's a sudden spike on the 16th of October in the UK. Again, that's the guy. Why are they searching this guy on October 16th in the UK? Like, to the point that it's causing a 100 level interest from Google. Here's a spike from Australia on the 27th of October. Now, it could be that somebody was using a VPN and setting this guy up. But it seems like there's more than one person here. The Twitter thread shows multiple users sharing their findings in the comments, corroborating the above. You might think this is just conspiracy theory nonsense and nothing to see here, right? Well, you're kind of right, because Google memory hold it and has erased most of the search data. Because they usually do that, right? The search function is up and running for long-term data for any location over the past 5 years, but many of the spikes are gone. Some of the older results are still showing. It's worth noting that some social media users made screen recordings of their searches because they suspected this would happen and didn't want to be accused of fakery. I can name one specifically who got allegedly fired by Breaking Points this week. That's James Lee from the 5149 podcast. Google Trends currently shows isolated spikes in the UK and Israel in both 2023 and 2024 at around the same times. That's weird. It then shows nothing until after the shooting, apart from a spike in Israel from July of 2025 with a score of 100. Why would Israel know anything about this cat? However, we know that there were more spikes in the US, UK, Israel, and Australia. Perhaps the older results are just a coincidence. It's hard to say, but it's hard to dismiss the recent hidden results as mere coincidence. If you search the past 7 days for, say, District of Columbia or Tel Aviv, you'll get the above error message. Try to search on Ramanullah Lochinwall and see what happens. A worldwide search now shows 0 records for him prior to the killing. Weird, huh? It's almost like what happened with Charlie Kirk in a way, but he was famous, so he was being searched over time. You didn't have a 0 and then a spike to 100 the minute it happened and then interest falling off the way that it would normally trend. But you saw these things above. That's real. Those things were really there. People were searching Google Trends to see if people were searching for these terms, and it turns out they were. If you're still unconvinced, just look at the below. Yes, that's one of the victims, Sarah Beckstrom, being searched in Tel Aviv prior to the shooting. Why would that be? Why would that be? 100 spiked interest well prior. That's November 23rd. It was before that. Thanksgiving's the 26th. Now, if vanishing Google spikes were the only weirdness around the case, you might argue that more evidence is needed. Evidence such as the shooter's ties to CIA. Well, our CIA director, John Ratfuck, a.k.a. Ratcliffe, cites that the alleged guard shooter's ties to CIA and other U.S. agencies in Afghanistan. Oops. He also has ties to the armed forces, Kandahar Strike Force. This cardholder is working in conjunction with Afghan and U.S. armed forces for a question called Firebase Gecko, and there's the number. Turns out Ramanullah Lochinwall is a veteran of the CIA-trained and funded Kandahar Strike Force, a 0-unit, aka Afghan paramilitary force that's been accused of human rights violations and of killing civilians. He served alongside U.S. forces for 10 years and was granted asylum in the U.S. in 2021. Given that he's 29, he must have been no more than 15 when he was recruited. Despite working as an Amazon delivery driver, Lochinwall was living in a $2,000 a month apartment in Bellingham, Washington, with his wife and 5 kids. If she's working, it's possible for them to be able to afford a $2,000 a month apartment, I would assume. Right? I cannot believe that he might do this. This sounds like MK Ultra kind of shit in a way. Lochinwall reportedly yelled Allahu Akbar while carrying out the DC shooting. Was that what his handlers told him he had to do? It's kind of like a Tyler Robinson transgender girlfriend Antifa bullets thing. It conveniently just fits a narrative. And Americans are pushing that narrative hard. Just look at this clip from our Department of War Secretary, Whiskey Pete Hegseth. The victims were the best of America who love their fellow Americans. And the shooting happened just steps away from the White House. Oh my God, clutch my pearls. And that was a narrative, by the way, that just steps away from the White House was blanketed across that whole media sphere. Hegseth talks of deploying 500 additional National Guards. He's such a pussy. And entering other cities out of Christian values. And then he pivots to counter cartel effort and narco terrorists and peace through strength. It's all about using fear and grief to justify fascism. I'm not even going to play his nonsense drivel. He doesn't get to speak here. You have influencers like Laura Looney. Loomer, declaring that the U.S. is at war with Islam, calling for every mosque to be raided and for mass deportations of Muslims. You know, we're supposed to have both freedom of religion and freedom from religion in this country, Laura. There we go. There's one. Elon Musk argued that calling someone a fascist should be considered incitement to murder. The Trump administration calls nonviolent people terrorists and then kidnaps or murders them, but that apparently is fine if they're Venezuelan. Right? And what's even funnier is the whole fascist thing. When Mamdani was at the White House, Trump said to him, some reporter asked him, well, how do you square calling him a fascist? Do you still think he's a fascist? And Trump, who's sitting down, looks up and goes, it's all right. You can answer. You can call me a fascist. It's fine. Funniest thing I saw all week, honestly. Trump really is very funny. I can't stand him, but he's very funny. Trump is now talking of restricting immigration from the Middle East and has described immigrants as the single greatest national security threat facing our nation. He plans to examine every Afghan immigrant and send those who don't belong here back to Afghanistan, where the Taliban will surely kill them for assisting the U.S. during the war. Some of us predicted there would be false flags to push the fascist agenda, but you didn't have to be Nostradamus to see this one coming, because they kept telling us attacks were imminent, like they had a crystal ball. And they really must have had a crystal ball, because not only did their Google searches show prior knowledge of the DC shooting, but also the Charlie Kirk shooting. In the recent days before Charlie Kirk was killed, there were all kinds of weird searches related to the alleged shooter and the hospitals and doctors in the area. To be clear, we're talking about sudden spikes on terms which previously had no search data. Supporters of Trump and Netanyahu need to understand that these men, have no loyalties and will hurt or kill anyone to further their fascist agenda. Wait, there we go. I missed one thing. Yep. Most of the spikes, came from Washington and Tel Aviv. No. And then, of course, that backs up to the Twitter data that showed when the NSA? Where were they? Where were they housed? Tel Aviv, right? And then they hid the country data till it was fixed and changed to the United States. Then they restricted country data on certain agencies. Like, guys, you're just screaming the quiet parts out loud. Now, I brought one other article from Professor David Miller. It's really long. And this is from back in September, he wrote this. And I caught this on the Israel-Palestine news.org website that republished it yesterday. And this is an article that documents all of the different methods and areas of Zionist infiltration in order to penetrate and influence an entire society to ensure that their agenda gets passed, pushed, and comes out on top. And I thought it was fascinating, and I wanted to bring it and skim through it, and I'll link it in the description afterwards on Substack. Okay, what is the function of the Zionist movement? Well, let's start with 4 statements that together define what the Zionist movement does by adding its functions cumulatively. 1, the Zionist movement creates and sustains the Israel lobby to extend its ideological and political reach, shaping both foreign and domestic policy in the countries where it operates, which is just about everywhere. It provides material support for ethnic cleansing and genocide, funneling millions each year through charities that aid in land theft and war crimes. It grooms children and youth into ideological loyalists through a vast network of schools, synagogues, youth groups, and settler recruitment programs, including birthright tours, the Massa Journey, and the Lone Soldier Program. Beyond all of this, the movement systematically dispatches its adherents into broader society as lifelong agents of Zionist ideology. This is not a metaphor. It is infiltration. This concept of infiltration extends beyond the traditional intelligence model of recruiting agents for covert missions, though that too remains a part of it. Think Epstein. It also involves utilizing individuals who are, in a sense, sleeper agents ready to be activated. That's the Cyanine. We talked about that and even references it. It was Professor David Miller who wrote that article that I read last summer about them. But it's even more than that, in the sense that in many cases, the sleepers don't even need an actual tap on the shoulder to partake in a particular mission. They're already primed to act when the interests of the so-called Jewish state are threatened, quote unquote, or even merely perceived or imagined to be. They're primed by their often decades-long experience of radicalization and grooming to become believing ideological Zionists. I know I'm related to some. In other words, this is a multifaceted and profound level of infiltration cultivated from childhood and reinforced throughout every stage of life. To understand how such a system came into being, we must first go back and examine the origins and evolutions of the Zionist movement itself. So this starts, again, prior to 1948, because this, again, did not start in 1948. Even the most hardline Zionists and the most revolutionary socialists agree on one point. Prior to 1948, the Zionist movement functioned as a coordinated political force. It organized and executed the Nakba, the ethnic cleansing and mass displacement of Palestinians, in order to establish what it called the State of Israel. Zionists, of course, reject this terminology, but the historical record is clear. With its primary objective achieved in 1948, the movement briefly considered dissolving. However, at the World Zionist Congress in Jerusalem in 1951, delegates chose to continue and redefine new goals for the future. This led to the creation of the Jerusalem Program, which formally codified the movement's new objectives. Alongside it, the Israeli parliament enacted the World Zionist Organization Jewish Agency Status Law to govern the relationship between the State of Israel and the Zionist movement. That law remains in effect today, shaping the global Zionist movement's operations and responsibilities. Bet you didn't know that, because I didn't before I read this. At the World Zionist Congress held in Jerusalem on September 24th, 1951, the movement faced a crossroads. Again, this was about whether to go forward or disband. But, with new goals in practice by a vote of 286-0, with the remaining 438 delegates abstaining. So it wasn't a majority. But the ones that didn't vote just didn't vote. So you got a unanimous quote-unquote vote. But there were over 700 delegates, most of which abstained. The ones who voted yes to continue. David Ben-Gurion speaks at the 51 World Zionist Congress. They adopted the new set of objectives to reorient the movement. These were defined as the strengthening of the state of Israel, the ingathering of the exiles in Eretz Yisrael. Okay, they want to grab all the Jews from outside and bring them in, and the fostering of the unity of the Jewish people. They wanted to make it insular so that there was nowhere else safe in the world for Jews to live. That's the narrative that they were using to push all Jews toward Israel at the time, to give it legitimacy. This movement marked the transformation of Zionism from a settler colonial movement into a global ideological infrastructure. It was no longer about just building a state. It was about embedding that state into the hearts, minds, and institutions of Jews worldwide. To the point where every Jew in America, from the time I grew up in the 70s and 80s, were taught that you have, this is your home, your second home. It's not my home. It's never been my home. I never felt at home. I never considered it to be my home. I don't feel welcome there, and I don't want to ever be there or ever go there again. I have no interest in that. But I have more rights to the land there than people that spent their entire lives there right now. It's disgraceful. So at the time, the law passed by the Knesset to formalize that relationship, all right, spelled out the obligations of both parties and designated the World Zionist Organization as the authorized body responsible for developing and settling the land, absorbing immigrants from the diaspora, and coordinating the work of Jewish institutions operating within Israel. Now that Zionists of America is a spin-off of the World Jewish Congress, by the way. It still exists today. Talked to Gen X Girl about that earlier this year. Crucially, the law affirmed that the state of Israel expects the cooperation of all Jews as individuals and groups in building up the state. That's why they call us self-hating Jews if we're against this. Because they have to alienate anyone that's not on board with their little fucking ethno-state project. Fuck these assholes. It further stipulated that the World Zionist Organization requires full cooperation, again, in its coordination, right? To that end, the law mandated the creation of a formal committee to coordinate activities between the Israeli government and the Zionist movement's executive leadership. Well, wouldn't that give like an ethno-state apartheid kind of a leg up and unfair advantage over everybody else in this quote-unquote democracy that you just created? In other words, the State of Israel and the World Zionist Organization, as a matter of law, are required to work together, and also as expressed in law, both bodies expect the cooperation of all Jews. How are they to fucking write a law of what Jews in America can do? Fuck these people so hard. The extent to which this expectation is met remains an empirical question. It should be. So, among these are, again, the preservation of Jewish unity and enduring the bond to Eretz Yisrael. Fuck these assholes. All right. The duties of the individual Zionists. So what they did was they decided to come up with like a set of laws or a set of a code. Here's what we expect from you as a Jewish individual, even in another country. From 1972. Among these were the call to make Aliyah, that is, to become a settler colonialist in occupied Palestine. Others included joining local Zionist federations or affiliated groups, actively promoting the movement's ideological program, and ensuring children receive Zionist, Hebrew, and Jewish education designed to reinforce loyalty to Israel. Zionists were also expected to donate financially through established channels such as Karen Hayesod, the Jewish National Fund, or their local branches in order to consolidate Israel's economy and fund its expansionist aims, and also give it lobbying power. With the exception of physically becoming a settler colonialist, all of these duties amount to an explicit call for infiltration of host societies. Perhaps the most direct duty, however, is to strengthen Zionist influence within the community. This likely refers to the Jewish community rather than broader society, but even so, it's still a call to expand the influence of Zionism on society as a whole. Again, fuck Israel. Right, more like the Jerusalem pogrom. Yes, that's right. Go start over on Rumble. Okay, one might reasonably ask, how much attention ordinary Zionists pay to such calls? Are these dry, dead words left to gather dust in the central Zionist archives in Al-Quds? Or do they still animate the central activities of the movement today? Well, let us take a look. Here's a 1961 report from the Jewish Chronicle about a Zionist meeting in Glasgow, which came to hand as I was writing this. I present it as an example of the movement's thinking and practical activities. The meeting was specifically designed as an educational Zionist event and expounded a particular set of ideas. Okay, this is about educating diaspora children as Jews, right? And this is, the minutes say, outlining a practical program for bringing up children as Jews, Dr. Simon declared that this would have to start with the education of expectant Jewish mothers and fathers at child guidance clinics. As a result of this, children from their earliest years would be reared in an atmosphere where they would see all the symbols and customs of Jewish life observed. This would then be followed by the children being sent to a Jewish or Hebrew kindergarten and then to a Jewish day school. They're isolationists. Another important part of the program, Dr. Simon went on, would be the creation of a Jewish resurgence. In this connection, however, it was an unfortunate something for Anglo Jewry when people, it's cutting off the book, like Rabbi Dr. Alexander Altman fled the country at a time when there was so much need of him to be here. There was also a vital need for a planned Jewish adult education program, said this Dr. Simon. All right. The adults did not education information that they would accept, but education they refused, which is weird. But again, it's indoctrination. It's not education. Oh, here. He's got it right there. All right. The measures which would be taken if the children in the diaspora were to remain Jews were discussed by Professor Ernest Simon of the Hebrew University, where he gave an address at a meeting held in the Central Hotel last week in connection with the Zionist Federation's Education Fortnight. All right. Yeah. Creation of a Jewish resurgence. That's what that word was up there. Resurgence. Okay. In this view, Zionist education required that children remain Jewish, making Jewish education crucial for the movement, indoctrination, and isolation the entire time. All right. And again, going back to the British Zionist Federation founded Scotland's first and only Jewish school, Calderwood Lodge. Is that commitment to inoculating Zionism still present today? It certainly is. Although Calderwood Lodge was taken over by the local authority in 1982, it remains a Zionist school today. It collaborates with the United Jewish Israel Appeal, Maccabee, Mitzvah Day, the Scottish Jewish Youth Alliance, and other Zionist groups. Gross. The UJIA is the UK outpost of one of Israel's 4 national institutions established to create and sustain the State of Israel. It serves as the UK affiliate of Keren HaYesod, which raises funds to finance settlement in Palestine. In its 2018-19 annual report, UJIA described its mission as developing a lifelong connection between Israel and the diaspora community, beginning with children as young as 4. Of 12 school programs run by UJIA, 9 are in primary schools, reaching thousands of pupils. Primary schools, like grade school. But that again, and so this again shows that lifelong connection. I wanted to show this graphic, or that they have programs to support people of all ages and to introduce you to Jews of all ages is the idea. Zionists of all ages, but it's isolationist to Jews. But what's funny is the Christian Zionists all support this. Why? Because they want Jesus to come back, and according to all their scripture, the Jews have to control Israel. So therefore, they're doing all they can to try to make that happen. It's manufacturing it. And that's why the Torah Jews are so opposed to this. That's not how this is supposed to go down. Does it work? Well, varying statistics suggest that between 60 and 90% of British Jews identify as some sort of Zionist. So, yes, it's effective. Research by Pew in the U.S. in 2021, now that's dropped significantly since, but then 8 in 10 U.S. Jews say caring about Israel is an essential or important part of what being Jewish means to them. Nearly 6 in 10 say they personally feel an emotional attachment to Israel. That's complete indoctrination. Most of them have never been there or were there for a week or two, maybe. Most of them have never spent any significant time there, but yet they feel an emotional attachment and loyalty there? An essential part of what being... Why? Because they were brainwashed into it. Ultra-Zionists, I don't know the difference, often claim that even more Jews identify as Zionist. For example, the so-called Campaign Against Anti-Semitism conducted a survey in late 2023 that produced even higher figures that reportedly revealed that 97% of British Jews feel personally connected to events happening in Israel, which again is just a bunch of wishful thinking horse shit. 80% of respondents considered themselves to be a Zionist. Well, that alone is that they're preaching to a choir. Again, this is a really long article. Here are some of the infiltrators. Some within the movement consider the term infiltration outdated, arguing that it implies a deliberate Zionist strategy. Yet, this article has shown that such a strategy does exist. The question, however, is how conscious or deliberate it really is. The evidence suggests that there are different types of infiltration and different types of infiltrators. Okay, so he lays them out. We can begin with those directly or indirectly engaged in specific forms of infiltration on behalf of agencies to the Zionist entity, like the people that scream about pro-Israel stuff, for $7,000 a check. Their activities align more closely with the traditional sense of the term. From there, we turn to those with looser ties to the movement as a whole. In what follows, he outlines 6 types of infiltration. So you have, again, direct service to the Zionist entity. That's where they literally serve in the IDF, right? They delivered Mossad agents and weapons for subversion and assassination operations in Iran. That's the Ofer family. Another involves activities linked to Epstein, who gathered sexual compromat for Israeli intelligence. Not allegedly, he did. Mossad also relies on Sayanim. Again, we talked about this before. It's informal helpers abroad, most famously Robert Maxwell. Beyond this, there's thousands of Zionists working in the Israeli Ministry of Diaspora Affairs and its predecessor, the Ministry of Strategic Affairs. Very kind of, generic terms. Their operations range from propaganda and lobbying to trolling, doxing, and lawfare. And there's, again, evidence of all this stuff documented. One such network is the Combat Anti-Semitism Movement, which has nearly 1,000 members and operates in a joint venture with Voices of Israel, which is a company run by the Ministry of Diaspora Affairs. In total, many thousands of Zionist groups are engaged in this form of activity. It's a massive spider web of activity. Then you have tech startups, right? Unit 8200, using spyware like Celebrite, NICE, Toka, and the NSO group. maker of Pegasus. Right, then you have covert use of this vast surveillance apparatus by the Zionist regime has been widely noted. Investigative reports have also shown that the significant numbers of Zionist infiltrators, including former occupation forces members, intelligence operatives, and others, have secured senior positions across mainstream media and big tech. We've been covering that here at INN for years. Alan McLeod at Mint Press is famous for outing all the 8,200 people that work at Apple and at Facebook and Google and TikTok and everywhere else, and Meta and Microsoft even. All right, then you've got emissaries of the Zionist project. Right, this is also a civilian equivalent of the Sayanim, known as the Shlichim, or emissaries. That's like your Bill Ackmans. Right? These emissaries are placed in schools and synagogues and JCCs, right? So you've got people like that. Then you've got Zionist family networks. And finally, you've got defending Zionism over the life course. Final form of infiltration is tied directly to the strategy of ensuring that all Jews make an enduring, lifelong commitment to Israel. As this article has shown, again, this has been central to the Zionist movement since at least 1951 and remains so today. Zionists expect all Jews to act on behalf of Israel whenever called upon, or whenever they perceive Zionist interests to be under threat. And I say, fuck Israel. And if they call on me, I'm going to say fuck Israel. Practically, this means service to Zionism through daily, professional, political, and social activities wherever Zionists find themselves, in the media, political parties, business, finance, schools, universities, civil society, including the left wing and so-called anti-racist organizations. Yes, they want to infiltrate, literally. It's just, wow. In other words, Zionists throughout the social structure are engaged in subversion and infiltration. One example is the Jewish network within the UK civil service. Although set up by the civil service itself, it is in practice run by and for Zionists rather than Jews. Similar patterns exist in universities, the media, the legal professional, finance, industry, and other institutions across society. All right. When the time comes for the proverbial tap on the shoulder, how many who've passed through Zionist indoctrination will fail to respond appropriately? I'm one of them. To ask the question is almost to invite disbelief. In many cases, no tap on the shoulder is even required. Across the BBC, the media, the entertainment world, civil service, politics, finance, and other commanding heights of society, there are already Zionists who are ideologically committed. And for them, it makes perfect sense to do the right thing when the moment arrives. The fact remains that the Zionist movement encourages loyalty to its ideology and its program of action, even when these run counter to the interests of the host state, or in all cases, to the interests of its citizenry. Right? Can we trust Zionists in the end? No. Do we imagine that they're not infiltrating the left? The Palestine Solidarity Movement? The anti-war movement? Zionism is at its core a racist ideology. No matter how hard liberals, socialists, or leftist Zionists try to disguise it, that racism always reveals itself, whether in adopting Zionist positions in their professional lives or in subverting and sabotaging pro-Palestine activism in political life. Are you hearing me, Zoran Mamdani? Yeah, I said it. This has historically meant that the anti-racist movement and the Palestine Solidarity Movement have been weak on the question of Zionism. It was a major mistake for the left in the UK and elsewhere not to confront Zionism head-on earlier. Today, we face a significant struggle to cleanse the left and the anti-imperialist movement of both Zionists and Zionist assumptions, ideas that have seeped out of the movement and into the consciousness of many non-Zionist or anti-Zionist socialist activists. This process has been underway for many decades. However, this isn't the place for a detailed analysis of the Jewish left or of Zionist penetration of the non-Jewish left. A fuller exposition will be needed in another article, but for now, it's enough to point to the need for a material and maximalist anti-Zionism. All right. Again, documenting more forms of infiltration today. He closes by saying, knowing your enemy is the first step toward defeating them and toward dislodging Zionism from its entrenched status and role across society. Yes, it was an interesting choice there to use that word cleanse. Well, they've been ethnically cleansing their land of anyone that opposes them, which means that they then they're going to try to do the same thing to anyone that is of that ideology. So they of course, in turn, must be cleansed. The Zogs set you up, Sean. Very funny, right? There's just so much here. David Miller, this is a great article. There's, again, even more here than I was able to go through. Follow him on Twitter at Tracking Power. He's also on Substack. Oh, I wanted to mention, by the way, that he was fired from University of Bristol. Getting back to this article all the way at the bottom here. Sorry to scroll and make you go blind. David Miller is a non-resident senior research fellow at the Center for Islam and Global Affairs at the Istanbul Zaim University. But he is a former professor of political sociology at the University of Bristol. Again, fired for his anti-Zionism, for his pro-Palestine views. He's a broadcaster, he's a writer, and an investigative researcher. He's a producer of the weekly show Palestine Declassified on Press TV. And he's the co-director of the public interest investigations, of which spinwatch.org and powerbase.info are projects. So support David Miller. I appreciate his deep dive into exposing just how deep Zionism goes to infiltrate itself and to embed itself into all different areas of society so that they can make a phone call to, quote unquote, the right person, to an ally, to someone that will do their bidding for them when the time comes. Fuck Israel, by the way, one more time. We don't get remonetized by YouTube for that. Please support independent media. Cash App, $, Indie News Network. Ko-fi.com/Indie News Network. PayPal.me/Indie News Network. We're live over at IndieMediaToday.com over on Substack. INNNewsletter.com is another newsletter that I publish there for the network that we're part of. And then IndieNewsNow.com. We're live there now. That's the name of the show. And that's because we made a website that aggregates all independent news from sources that we have vetted and determined to be highly credible, and serve that to you in an ad-free environment. But there's also a place to watch the media free. There's a place to support the media you want to see and keep the media free with a Stripe link. And there is a watch live, so you can watch this thing live and get merch. You can do that too. We'll be back next Tuesday night at 10 p.m. Eastern for another Indie News Now Live. Subscribe to IndieMediaToday.com and you'll get clips emailed out to you all week. Support independent media because we need it more than ever, fam. I love you all. Have a good night, everyone. No! We just fucking lost the stream!
I guess this isn't such an awful place. Is that what you want me to say? You prove it's possible to sleep for days, and I still think you're right here awake. The cost of living isn't much to me, but God, it's so hard to say. And when they told you everything was safe, were you safe?
Who are these people?
December 7th is a day that will live in infamy. Actually, December 6th. And it's because it was 2 years to the day that Refaat Alareer was murdered by the IDF after being targeted by Barry Weiss, of all people, which was weird, but she's, of course, a rabid Zionist, and she decided to put a target on him, and he explicitly said, and we're going to get to that in a second, but I wanted to make note of that. I wanted to read an article written by our friend, The Dissident, INN co-founder and friend of the show. I'm planning on doing another one-on-one with him in the next 6-8 weeks or so. He's covered a ton of stuff lately. So he wanted to write a reminder that 2 years ago today, a Barry Weiss-led smear campaign led to the IDF murder of Refaat Alareer. And we're going to go through this. All right, let me blow it up a little bit so you can read a little better. Exactly 2 years ago, the beloved Palestinian poet, professor, and commentator Refaat Alareer was killed by a targeted IDF strike along with his brother's son, his sister, and 3 of her children, and a neighbor when his sister's home was attacked. As the Electronic Intifada Indie Media Award honoree documented after his murder, Alareer was best known for his wicked sense of humor, continuing to crack jokes even amid what he called the indescribable terror of relentless Israeli bombing and shelling and the pervasiveness of death. The fact that he continued to speak out, even knowing that Israel was systematically targeting journalists, doctors, and other intellectuals for extermination. And for the fact that he encouraged and nurtured hundreds of young writers in Gaza and inspired writers here as well. When the genocide in Gaza began, Refaat not only exposed Israel's crimes to the world, but also debunked the atrocity propaganda used to justify them. He was one of the first people to call out the Israeli mass rape hoax used to justify the genocide in Gaza, correctly stating that Israel uses rape lies or accusations against native Palestinians to demonize them and justify the Gaza genocide. Again, he said this right away. Refaat was also one of the first people to report on Israel's use of the Hannibal Directive to kill their own people on October 7th, saying, on October 7th, Israeli warplanes target and kill some of their own Israeli captured soldiers as they're transported into Gaza. Quote, this is called the Hannibal Directive, something that was later confirmed by the Israeli newspaper Haaretz and later by then Israeli Defense Minister Yoav Gallant, which we covered on How Did We Miss That? On INN. Alareer also used dark humor to mock Israel's most cartoonish and absurd propaganda used to demonize Palestinians, such as the ridiculous claim that Hamas baked a baby in an oven, which was, of course, soon debunked by Haaretz as a false claim, not true. There it is. Here's the link. All right. Few false stories feed the deniers, and this is a whole article about it. All right. Alareer mocked the fabricated claim, saying with or without baking powder, which they then used against him, claiming that he was anti-Semitic. Oh, my God. It was a fake fucking video. And he called it. But Barry Weiss, again, the editor of the Free Press and now CBS News and self-described Zionist fanatic, who clearly took issue with Refaat's factual debunkings of Israel's pro-genocide propaganda, took the joke out of context to make it look like he supported baking a baby, which he didn't. He was making fun of Israeli Hasbara. On October 30th, 2023, Weiss took a screen grab of the tweet and wrote, here is Refaat joking about whether or not an Israeli baby burned alive in an oven was cooked with or without baking powder, without mentioning that the atrocity propaganda claim had been fully debunked even by Israeli media. Of course she wouldn't, because she's not a journalist, she's a propagandist. All right? This, again, was found to not be true. This was one of those Zaka bullshit stories. He called it in real time, immediately, and it got him killed. Following this smear, Barry Weiss's followers in the IDF began sending graphic rape and murder threats toward Alareer and his family, saying things like, send me your address, we're going to wipe you out in Gaza. When we get to Gaza, I will personally rape, raw dog your mother, like disgusting stuff. And he showed these tweets. Refaat shared the graphic IDF threats and wrote, if I get killed by Israeli bombs or my family is harmed, I blame Barry Weiss and her likes. Many maniacal Israeli soldiers are already bombing Gaza. Take these lies and smears seriously and act upon them. And here's some of the DMs he was getting. Gross. Barry Weiss's smear campaign began to spread, with the pro-Zionist British tabloid Daily Mail publishing an article titled, quote, Palestinian professor previously published by New York Times makes sick joke about claim Hamas baked baby in an oven that repeated the smear. As journalist Rob Page noted in the Electronic Intifada, even Mayim Bialik, she's disgusting. She wrote that book, a children's book about when the bombs fall. Gross. Again, atrocity, propaganda, whitewashing, murder, and genocide. She joined the pile-on against Refaat in the New York Times. So she then described at the time him as a New York Times writer, falsely implying that he was a regular contributor, which he wasn't, and repeated again the lie about a baby baked in an oven. She said that when finding out that a baby was found in an oven, which it wasn't, he made a joke about whether what they baked it with. That was something he thought was appropriate to do. He made a joke about that. No, he didn't. She never deleted the tweet. She never retracted it. When he was murdered 2 years ago by the IDF, evidence shows that it was a targeted strike against him using her smear campaign as justification. The NGO Euromed Monitor noted that, quote, Rafael Alareer was killed in his sister's home in Al Sidra neighborhood in Al Daraj area in Gaza City, along with his brother Salah and one of his children, Mohammed, his sister Asma, and three of her children, Allah, Yahya, and Mohammed also, and a neighbor. The airstrike surgically targeted, quote unquote, the apartment on the second floor where he was in a 3-story building and not the entire building, indicating the apartment was the target and not possible collateral damage. Yet we know that they were targeting journalists by their cell signals, so again, this isn't much of a surprise. Journalist Richard Silverstein reported that, quote, a well-informed Israeli security source emailed me this confirmation, quote, because of the joke, the war cabinet decided that he is an Amalekite and ordered Shabak and the IDF to find and kill him. Following his murder in April of 2024, Israel killed his daughter, baby grandson, and son-in-law in yet another targeted strike in Gaza City. By the way, these are all war crimes, which killed Shimia Refaat Alareer, her husband Mohammed Abd al-Aziz Siam, and their 3-month-old son Abd al-Rahman. Yeah, his grandson, baby. Because 3 months old, that's justified, right? Fuck Israel. Because he told the truth about the Israeli genocide in Gaza and the propaganda used to justify it, Barry Weiss put a target on his back with a smear campaign that culminated in them doing exactly that, targeting and murdering him, along with several members of his family. Fuck Israel. Support independent media like The Dissident that will call this for what it is. All right. Just heartbreaking. Just taken too soon, unnecessarily. Rest in power. Thank you for your contribution to the world. Like, seriously. Watch some of the videos and the interviews that he did with EI. It's so sad. Like, this guy was peaceful. He was peaceful. And then they invaded his home and they bombed everyone around him and they murdered everyone around him. This guy didn't want to fight. This guy wanted to teach. Okay. Next, we go to Israel-Palestine-News.org, another really good organization, good outlet. That it's another aggregator, but this is all they focus on. Straight up, just Israel-Palestine. And they put out a daily update, daily going across Gaza and the world and everywhere. Specifically, in this case, I wanted to get to the West Bank. And I've got another story about West Bank as well, but here's Gaza only receiving 16% of the cooking gas that it needs, right? And this is coming out of B'Tselem, right? Then we've got, here we go, occupied West Bank, Jerusalem headlines. First of all, every day, Palestinians in the West Bank and East Jerusalem endure dozens of incidents like the ones below at the hands of Israeli soldiers and or settlers. For background on the West Bank, read these two pieces. Again, this will be linked in the Substack after you go to the link at the newsletter, and you'll see the links to every single thing that I'm showing you tonight. So, Israeli soldiers first killed 2 Palestinians in Hebron. All right, they shot and killed 55-year-old and a 20-year-old. Red Crescent said its ambulances were blocked and medics were prevented, of course, from reaching the victims. Israeli forces withheld the body of Rajabi, the 20-year-old. Why? The army alleged that the two carried out a car ramming attempt that lightly injured one soldier, but eyewitnesses and humanitarian groups even disputed this account, describing the killings as a field execution, which we know happen all the time. Since October 2023, Israeli forces and settlers have killed at least 1,000 Palestinians in the West Bank. Again, no Hamas in the West Bank. And around 224 of those are children, meaning under 18. Children. This one was heartbreaking also. Israel orders to uproot hundreds of olive trees. Why? It's just straight cruelty. Hundreds of year-old olive trees uprooted because they want to systematically destroy the way of life, the infrastructure, the agriculture, but it's not genocide, right? That's the textbook definition of genocide. Israeli forces shoot 4 Palestinians near Jerusalem. Soldiers abduct 6 Palestinians in Qalqila and Ramallah. And look at this. This is what. Look at, he's aiming literally at the cameraman right there. Wow. Bethlehem Mayor Maher Kanawati at the 2025 Christmas tree lighting ceremony in Bethlehem. We are here to stay, to preserve this land, for it has something worth living for, and from it we derive our right to survive. Palestine is the land of messages and our deep roots in history, and it will only happen through our steadfastness and adherence to it. Wherever there is life, freedom, and hope, there will be Palestine. And its story is not symbolic, but an act lived by the ancestors and completed by us, the children. And there's an entire speech. And they lit a tree, a Christmas tree, for the first time in 3 years in Bethlehem. So that's something. I don't know what. All right. And then there's the latest military tech tested in Gaza, wanted by the West, from the Wall Street Journal. Gross. Again, this is a great little summary, long summary daily. More about West Bank. Now, when you get the attention of World Socialist website, that's doing something, because that's not something that you normally see. Like, they talk about Gaza, they'll talk about Palestinians, but when they're talking about this specifically, Israel tightens its grip on West Bank. And I saw this yesterday, or the other on Sunday, under the cover of the ethnic cleansing of 2.3 million Palestinians from Gaza. Israel has tightened its grip on West Bank, aimed at incorporating the whole of Palestine into a greater Israel that now encompasses parts of Syria and Lebanon. We talked about that extensively, that it was the plan and that the Greater Israel Project should never be allowed to be happening. And that Israel shouldn't even be recognized as a country by the United Nations at this point. Last week, the IOF mounted its largest military deployment in the West Bank since the supposed ceasefire in Gaza in October, which has killed over 100 people by far, sending in hundreds of soldiers along with armored vehicles to storm the town of Tubas near Nablus. A military spokesman said that a broad counterterrorism operation would continue for several days. The military imposed a curfew on the town, and some neighboring communities closed roads and forced some residents to leave their homes to make way for Israeli soldiers. Where are they supposed to go? Here we go again. This sounds a lot like the forced displacement from Gaza. Get the fuck out. We don't care where. We're taking your house and leave. They're running away from tear gas there. That was on November 28th. The IDF claimed that Tubas had become a haven for terrorism and distributed leaflets threatening, quote, if you do not change this, we will act as we did in Jenin and Tulkarm. Okay, this is a reference to the IDF's assaults on the two cities earlier this year that caused widespread damage and permanently displaced 40,000 Palestinians. The Israeli authorities provided them with no alternative accommodation, nor did they offer any humanitarian assistance while denying them the right to return their homes. So sleep out in the middle of the fucking desert, I guess, is the plan, and starve. According to an IDF statement on Twitter, it aims to, quote, reinforce control over the area, and prevent the reformation of armed resistance groups. Its real purpose is to enable the construction of a new security road and military checkpoint that, as past experience has shown, foreshadow a new Zionist settlement by forcing the residents out of the area. In another move, the IDF is constructing a new 22-kilometer, 50-meter wide separation wall inside the Jordan Valley. That's at least 12 kilometers west of the border with Jordan. This involves, of course, demolishing homes because they don't give a fuck, greenhouses, water systems, and grazing infrastructure, part of the plan. Another site that's come under attack from both settlers and the military is Joseph's Tomb near Nablus, nominally under Palestinian Authority control, with settlers mounting ever larger and more frequent incursions. I'm worried for Issa Amro. This is right where he is. In October, we talked about this last week, the Knesset, Israel's parliament, voted to advance a bill declaring that, quote, the laws, judicial system, administration, and sovereignty of the state of Israel shall apply to all areas of settlement in West Bank, which they again refer to as Judea and Samaria. Israel has already carved up the West Bank to such an extent that movement between the towns and cities is becoming increasingly difficult, if not impossible. Again, part of the plan. While significant and growing number of West Bank Palestinians already live under Israeli sovereignty, albeit without any of the rights of Israeli citizens. Of course they don't. They have to be treated like second class. Right? Because they're not Jewish, I guess. Fuck these guys. Fuck Israel. In September, Prime Minister Benjamin war criminal Netanyahu announced a plan to expand Israeli settlements in the West Bank that would effectively cut the Palestinian territory in half. That's what they did to Gaza. The E1 plan, that's Smotrich's plan, which includes building 7,600 homes in Ma'ale Adumim at a cost of nearly $900 million. They don't care how much it costs. It's our money anyway. What do they care? Would be built over a strategic tract of land separating the northern half of the West Bank from the south. Why? The plan aims to link Jerusalem to the Ma'ale Adumim settlement east of the city on land confiscated from the towns of Anata, Al-Tur, Isawaya, Azariah, Abu Dis. What? The E1 settlements in the center of the West Bank would link Jerusalem with the settlements in the Jordan Valley all the way to the border with Jordan. It basically gives them a fresh road, freshly paved road right through other people's homes to get right to Jerusalem. Boom, chicka, boom, chicka, boom, chicka, boom, chicka. That's like the road out of fucking Mel Brooks. We're off on the road to Judea. That's literally what they're building. These motherfuckers. War criminal, thieves, murderers. They would encircle the central hills of Ramallah and Nablus and the southern regions that include Bethlehem and Hebron. Are you kidding me? Last August, like I said, Smotrich, who controls the West Bank civil administration, that's unreal that he's allowed to have that, the world allows that, said the project would bury the idea of a Palestinian state, calling it Zionism at its best. You mean at its worst, at its most disgustingly evil and murderous and land thieving. He added, quote, the Palestinian state is being erased from the table, not with slogans, but with actions. That's what he's trying to do. He's not being shy about it. Every settlement, every neighborhood, every housing unit is another nail in the coffin of this dangerous idea. There's nothing dangerous about it if you're not trying to steal their land. Murder their kids. Netanyahu, speaking at the approval ceremony in September, said, quote, there will be more cities like Ma'ale Adumim. He then gave notice that he intends to implement the Alon plan drawn up shortly after the 1967 Arab-Israeli War, saying, quote, Israel's eastern front is not Ma'ale Adumim, but the Jordan Valley, unquote. This means that Israel intends to annex the entire north-south strip of the West Bank that runs alongside the Jordan Valley as the ultimate guarantor of what the Israeli military intelligence describes as the state's strategic depth. They're then going to attack from there into parts of Israel and into parts of Iraq and Saudi Arabia, if you know the way the Greater Israel map lays out. This is their way of establishing more of a strategic depth, a foothold, as you will, so they can then attack even further and steal even more land from even more sovereign countries. That's the plan. Together, the Alon plan and the E1 project would squeeze out the Palestinians. No, it would literally exterminate and genocide the Palestinians, displace them, and put them with nowhere to live, nowhere to sleep, and nowhere to get food. Again, that's the Israeli plan for the Palestinians. Like they've been showing us for 2 fucking years. When's anybody going to wake up and stop this? While successive governments have approved the expansion of settlements that are now home to more than 700,000 Jews in the West Bank and East Jerusalem, Netanyahu has vastly expanded the settlement since returning to power in December of 2022. At the head of Israel's most far-right pro-settler coalition, he launched his final solution, where have I heard those words before, of the Palestinian issue in October 23. That sounds a lot like Nazi language about something called the Jewish question. Yeah. The timing of Netanyahu's approval of the E1 settlements, whose construction had been frozen for more than 2 decades amid fierce international opposition because it would end any possibility of a contiguous Palestinian statelet, was no accident. He wanted to drive a knife in the heart of it. It was followed by declarations by a growing number of countries of their intent to recognize a Palestinian state. Of course, an empty gesture which Israel has denounced. We've talked about what an empty gesture that actually is and how meaningless it is, that they're not actually allowing them to have any kind of government or control of anything or have a military or be able to hold Israel accountable for anything it's done. Netanyahu can greenlight the settlements because the U.S. and major European powers have supported him to the hilt as part of their broader efforts to gain control of the resource-rich Middle East and prepare for war against China. This is actually a really, really well-written article and spot on in every way. The UN and the ICJ, of course, have ruled that Israel's settlements in the West Bank are illegal under international law, which they don't give a fuck about. Last year, the ICJ found that the expansion of the settlements was such that Israel had crossed the line into annexation in significant parts of the West Bank. Yeah, they admitted they were doing that, leading it to issue an advisory opinion that Israel had unlawfully annexed parts of the West Bank. But neither the UN nor the ICJ have done anything to ensure the dismantling of the settlements or to prevent their expansion. I don't know what they can do. Would U.S. troops fire on UN troops? We know that Israeli troops will. We know that the ICJ doesn't have any kind of a military enforcement arm that could force them to do that, and that Israel isn't even technically part of the ICJ. Israel's tightening grip on the West Bank has been accompanied by a wave of settler violence against the Palestinians, which also we've been covering. They've gone on the rampage, burning cars, desecrating mosques, wrecking industrial plants, and destroying farmland. According to the UN's humanitarian office, the number of attacks has surged because there's no accountability, with settlers launching around 8 attacks daily on the olive harvest during October, with attacks continuing last month. Not only are they not doing anything about it, but it's literally backed by the IDF. The IDF are standing there specifically making sure that the Palestinians don't respond and retaliate on the settlers. Disgusting. Settlers have injured more than 1,000 Palestinians so far this year, double the rate of last year, and killed 21 people. This is in addition to the at least 1,000 Palestinians killed by the military. According to the UN, settlers have forced at least 2,200 Palestinians from their homes, while the Israeli authorities have demolished the homes of more than 6,000 people. What would happen if somebody went and demolished 6,000 Israeli homes? They've done all this under the protection of the IDF and the police. Wow, somebody just said that before. And with the active encouragement of Israel's far-right coalition government. And the far-right coalition governments of the United States, the United Kingdom, Australia, and everywhere else. According to a TV Channel 12 project report citing police data, the number of police investigations into settler violence has plummeted since Ben-Gvir took office as National Security Minister at the start of 2023. Yeah, they don't even report them. They don't respond to them. They don't consider them to be any problem. These few police investigations rarely lead to an indictment or conviction, of course. According to Israeli rights group Yesh Din, fewer than 6% of all investigations into settler violence led to an indictment during the entire 20-year period to 2024. Just 3% of those investigations even led to convictions. And you've got a guy that doesn't want to convict any of these people anyway. Then you've got Mahmoud Abbas of the Fatah-dominated Palestinian Authority, both widely despised by the Palestinians, because he hasn't lifted a finger to oppose any of Israel's expansionist actions. He's also like 89 years old and no power. He does whatever he's told because they're paying his bills. Functioning in his role as Israel's subcontractor in policing the Palestinians, because he is a piece of shit, Abbas has increased his collaboration with Israel and subservience to the U.S. in a bid to consolidate his own and Fatah's grip on power. He mistakenly thinks that whatever's left, he's going to be able to control. The truth is, the sad part is, there's going to be nothing left. And there'll be nothing left of him at that point anyway, I guess is what he's figuring. He'll run the clock out on all this shit. Abbas condemned the October 7th attacks and insisted that he wants an unarmed Palestinian state. His security forces targeted Palestinian fighters resisting Israel, killing more than a dozen Palestinians and arresting hundreds of others, paving the way for the IDF to launch its mass raids on the West Bank's northern cities earlier this year. He shut down Al Jazeera, which was reporting on the siege in Jenin, suspending its operations and accusing it of incitement just months after Israel did so. He's Uncle Ruckus. In February, to appease Tel Aviv and Washington, Abbas canceled benefit payments to the families of Palestinian prisoners and those killed or wounded in Israeli attacks. This action followed a 2018 decision by the U.S. to withdraw financial aid from the Palestinian Authority until such payments ceased. Again, all about the Benjamins, baby. In April, the 90-year-old, he's 90, not 89, the 90-year-old Abbas named Hussein al-Sheikh, a Fatah time server, notorious for his close ties to Israel and widely seen as Israel's choice, as vice president of the PA and his successor. How nice that they don't get elections. They don't get to choose. Last month, al-Sheikh met former UK Minister Tony Blair, whom President Donald Trump has indicated will run Gaza on his behalf, and a U.S. official in Ramallah to discuss Trump's plan for Gaza. Now, we found out today or yesterday that Blair will not be involved. Thank goodness. He's another war criminal who should be nowhere near West Bank, Gaza, anywhere near Palestine. Abbas recently met with Emmanuel Macron in Paris to present the draft of the new constitution and institutional framework for a state of Palestine. Amazing how he gets the right of return, huh? Signaling efforts to establish a reformed PA that, under Donald Trump's peace plan, could eventually qualify to administer Gaza, whatever the fuck that means. Again, there's going to be no Palestinians left to administer in Gaza. He'll be 97 years old at the time. Abbas, of course, has not released the draft. And we have no idea what his vice, although they're friendly to Israel, that's going to be another fucking al-Jalani guy. Abbas insisted during a meeting in Ramallah with German foreign minister, in August, that any elections in Palestine will not include political factions or individuals who do not adhere to the program and commitments made by the PLO and the PA. So he gets to dictate the terms, and of course Israel dictates the terms to him, so it's just he's a proxy for Israel. A few weeks ago, he issued a, quote, decree law. Again, he's 90 fucking years old. Imagine Trump 10 times more senile and 10 years older. That's who they're claiming as their boss. Palestinians hate this guy. A few weeks ago, he issued a decree law imposing these regulations for local elections that will prevent Hamas, the most popular party, from taking part. Again, there is no Hamas in the West Bank organized at all. Hamas, for its part, said it will relinquish its rule in Gaza and it will support an interim administration of Gaza under the PA. They're agreeing to all of it, but release the hostages, right? Oh, right. They already did that. Update your Hasbara talking points, folks. Fuck Israel. This was a really good article from World Socialist website. This was Jean Shaul. Really, really good piece. And fuck Israel for all of that. Every war crime that they've committed. Speaking of which, Netanyahu the world is currently letting Netanyahu decide what happens to his victims while still committing a genocide against them? Unbelievable. He's just walking around doing press conferences and getting podiums while Palestinian children are sleeping in cold tents and under wet blankets, if not being raped by groups of IDF men. That's the reality of what we're living under right now. And we're supposed to act like this is normal. But worse, we talked about Ben Gvir earlier. All right, convicted terrorist, current architect of mass sexual violence, gang rape, and genocidal torture, walked into the room wearing a noose pin on his suit. Not a metaphor, a literal yellow fucking noose, echoed by the men with him. Yeah, I got a photo. Genocide regalia proudly displayed in government chamber. And he wasn't subtle about the message. Quote, we all came up with the nooses as one of the options for the death of Palestinian prisoners, unquote. There's also the execution platform, the electric chair, the euthanasia. I received 100 requests from doctors who said, just tell me when. And every single one of those should lose their license because, of course, that's not part of the Hippocratic Oath, which is do no harm. This is not policy debate. This is a state rehearsing its fantasies of elimination out loud. While the media fixates on the death penalty bill he's pushing, Wallah quietly reported what the regime is already doing. At least 110 Palestinian prisoners have been executed through torture inside Israeli torture centers. The noose isn't symbolic. It's an admission. A settler colonial regime wearing the iconography of lynching while Palestinians die in its prisons is not extremism. It's the naked face of genocide stripped of euphemism. They're not hiding it. They're accessorizing with it. That's Ben-Gvir. That's him wearing a noose, and his boys all wearing noose pins. Fucking disgusting. These guys belong in prison. And I got more, because fuck Israel. Francesca Albanese, UN Special Rapporteur on genocide. So she's kind of an expert in the matter. All right. Listen to this shit. This is coming out of Ryan Rosbiani. I think this might be an Al Jazeera.
I've received threats from all corners. And on top of it, yes, the unilateral coercive measures that make a non-person of me. I cannot exist in the global economy. I cannot have a credit card. I need to borrow money or borrow credit cards, which is not even always possible because not all countries allow you to use a credit card that is not yours. I had a U.S. medical insurance that refused to reimburse me because of the sanctions. But I also had a hotel room booked in my name by the European Parliament, and it was cancelled. It's important that people understand the extent and the great length the United States, Israel, and others would go to silence the voice of justice, the voice of human rights. But they will not succeed. They will not succeed. And it's important that people understand that we are frail and we are weak only if we are isolated.
That's the actual Nobel Prize winner. Forget Maria Corina Machado, whatever the hell her name is. But this woman has been fighting and for the Palestinian people's right to exist for 3 years plus. And they're literally debanking her. She can't have a credit card. A credit card. She's a fucking grown adult with money. No credit card because of the sanctions that they put against her. And then we get into Crazy Townville. All right. Of course, this is not a Voltaire quote. It's a Nazi quote. To learn who rules over you, simply find out who you're not allowed to criticize. All right. And literally, it's been used to describe the Israelis because every time you do criticize Israel for murdering Palestinians, you get canceled, you get censored, you get shadow banned, you get everything. Right. But now they're claiming Miss Rachel, of course, is Hamas. So therefore, she's the devil. Oh, my God. But ready for this one? Gen X girl says, I've reached a point where I simply never want to see or interact with these Zionist assholes. They're demented, psychotic, deranged, and genocidal, and they need to shut the fuck up. What are we talking about? Well, our village crazy lady found this wonderful person looking into wondering who's funding Miss Rachel. Lunatics. Ready for this one? Oh, my God.
Now, we know that the only way to really make change is to get to the bottom of who is funding some of these bad actors. Of course, you and I can say, oh my gosh, can you believe about everything we see because every day it's whack-a-mole. But that is not going to change what's happening. But Stop Anti-Semitism is going after Miss Rachel. They are going after who is funding her. Because there is no way a children's television personality, like the Mr. Rogers of my time, suddenly becomes obsessed with defending Hamas. It makes no sense unless she's a paid actor. Going after Miss Rachel is a great example of what we need to be doing. They have appealed to Attorney General Pam Bondi to investigate who is funding Miss Rachel. It's Qatar, it's Iran, it's funding from bad actors. These people have infiltrated our universities, our newsrooms, the United Nations, and now it is time to figure out who is funding
Qatar.
them. And just today,
That's
Miss
who's
Rachel knows how
infiltrated
high
our
the stakes
fucking
are.
newsrooms.
She's complaining that they are putting her life at risk, which is what she has done to every Jewish person worldwide since she started campaigning for a terrorist regime.
No, you fucking lunatic. No, she's saying to stop murdering Palestinian babies. That's not putting Jews at risk. That's not putting me at risk. And fuck off, you crazy lunatic bitch. Fuck off. Right. The Scent in Bloom. My kids are funding Miss Rachel, lol. Are you fucking kidding me? Who's funding Miss Rachel? Toddlers. Toddlers watching her content are who funds Miss Rachel. Advertisers on YouTube. She's fucking massive. But these people are completely unhinged. Watch them get Miss Rachel demonetized by YouTube because she promotes terrorism. Guess what? That's why this channel has been demonetized specifically for the accusation that we advocate for and promote terrorism. Not that we promote UN-approved self-defense in an occupied territory. Fuck Israel. But I'm sorry to say the Hasbara is far from over, because in their 2026 budget, Israel has a portion, well, Alareer writes, roughly $621 million for next year into selling the idea that killing kids and starving babies counts as self-defense. Smotrich and Saar approved from shekels 2.35 billion shekels in a Hasbara budget campaign for influencers in 2026. So if you haven't seen enough of these clowns, get ready. You're going to see a whole lot more. 1 billion shekels already authorized by the government. So that seemed like a lot until I saw Indie Media Award honoree Kyle Anzalone from antiwar.com and the Libertarian Institute. Israel plans to spend $740 million on propaganda in 2026. Again, that's our money. We should cut them off completely and take back everything that we've given them. If they've got enough money to spend $740 million on Hasbara and propaganda, fucking take all that shit back. The plan calls for increasing the propaganda budget to $729 million next year, up from $150 million this year. So 5x. The significant boost to the public diplomacy funds comes as Israel's image is plummeting in the U.S. I can't imagine why. Fuck these guys. So let's buy all the media and have our advocates buy CBS and HBO and Warner Brothers. $106 billion for that. We'll cover that next time because they're still negotiating and they're still fighting over who's going to get to buy Warner Brothers Discovery and how that's going to get whacked up. And it seems like these guys like Skydance is going to get a piece of it. All right. Over the past years, polls have found that a decreasing number of Americans support Israel and approve of Tel Aviv's onslaught on Gaza. Why would they approve of it? It's been more than 2 years since anybody attacked them. Who is attacking the Israelis from Gaza now? Who? How many? Where are they? Haven't they blown up like 90% of the fucking buildings in Gaza? A New York Times survey in September, because you know that they're honest actors, found more Americans sympathize with Palestinians than Israelis. They should. Additionally, 40% of Americans believe Israel is intentionally killing Palestinians in Gaza because the other 60% are fucking morons. Earlier this year, public filings showed that the Israeli Foreign Ministry is spending $4.1 million to target American evangelical Christians. Actually, they're bringing them over to Israel right now on some kind of retreat, more than 1,000 of them, completely on Israel's dime. The campaign will involve creating a mobile October 7th experience. Complete fucking bullshit that will visit Christian colleges, churches, and events. Are they going to have IDF tanks and Apache helicopters to shoot at the fucking cars and houses? I'll bet they won't. Another FARA filing revealed that Tel Aviv is paying some influencers up to $7,000 per post that promotes Israeli narratives. We've known all about that. Israel's planning to spend another $145 million to influence popular AI chatbots. So they're going to flood AI with spam, with slop. Tel Aviv's public relations push also involves bringing Americans to Israel. Again, earlier this year, the IDF gathered 250 state-level American lawmakers for a conference on passing laws that target BDS in the United States. Disgusting that any of that's allowed. How is that allowed? That a foreign country can fully pay for a junket for a sitting congressperson, and that's not considered influence? They all need to be in fucking jail. Every single one. 535 of them. Every single fucking one. Fuck Israel. I see that $1 million. No, it's $1 billion. $1 million, a drop in the bucket at this point. All right. Stephen Miller looks more like Dr. Evil than Indy probably does. Yes, 100%. I have a big Santa beard and hair, so I would say that he looks a lot more like Dr. Evil than I do. Hilarious. Stop Anti-Semitism is the bad actor. Get their funding. They get their funding from Zionists. Absolutely 100%. Thanks for participating, for chatting. Okay. It's nuts. There's a matrix to that question. Yes, the crazy hot matrix. We know. All right. Miss Rachel is my wife. Sean the Accord Lord. Seriously, I am going to ask you to support independent media. The ways to do that are with Cash App, $ Indie News Network, ko-fi.com/Indie News Network. I can't take that off the screen now. PayPal.me/Indie News Network. And then we've got website IndieNewsNow.com, like I said, INNNewsletter.com, and then we also have IndieMediaToday.com. Support independent media because we need it more than ever. I love you, fam, and see you next week. No! We just fucking lost the stream!
I guess this isn't such an awful place. Is that what you want me to say? You prove it's possible to sleep for days, and I still think you're right here awake. The cost of living isn't much to make, but God, it's so hard to say. And when they told you everything was safe, were you safe?
are these people?
During boats. So, yeah, we're up to our Fuck Israel segment. I wanted to cover some of these stories that don't necessarily make it through. There was a lot of stuff on Twitter this week about tents flooding again and about extreme torrential downpouring rain and it being extreme cold and there being nowhere to go and no shelter for everyone. But I think a lot of people are still taking their eye off the ball on the West Bank, and that's something that I've had my eye on closely for a while, and I will continue to. And I wanted to bring this one that I did not really see anybody else talking about, which is from Mondo Weiss, talking about an ancient Palestinian town that is more than 5,000 years old, may soon no longer exist because Israel, of course, plans on stealing it. Palestinian town of Safiya in the northern West Bank. Israel announced that it plans to seize the village and its archaeological sites because, of course they do. Fuck Israel. Why wouldn't they? Israel's creeping annexation of an ancient West Bank village and its archaeological site stands to upend the lives of its Palestinian inhabitants and dispossess them of their lands. Again, the plan the entire time. Israeli settlers and the Israeli army have stepped up efforts to make life unbearable for Palestinians, according to the town's residents, in order to compel them to leave. Many of them face expulsion as their homes fall within the area slated for seizure. Villagers, activists, politicians from Safiya, northwest of Nablus, have for years warned the international community of Israel's plans to erase them and the 5,000 years of Palestinian history contained within the town's archaeological ruins. Their warnings have fallen on deaf ears. Figures. On November 12th, the Israeli government issued an order outlining plans to expropriate 450 acres of land from ancient Safiya and the village's entire archaeological park, which includes homes and businesses. Israel's seizure of the lands of Safiya and the nearby village of Burqa will form part of a plan to create a national park for Israeli settlers on one of the most significant Palestinian historical sites in the West Bank out of 6,000 others. Wow, this is so disgusting. The village's archaeological park, because Israel, they care so much about the history of mankind, right? The archaeological park, which is being considered for a UNESCO World Heritage status, which I'm sure Israel would never allow or honor even if it was awarded, contains relics and artifacts spanning the Bronze Age from before 3000 BC to the Ottoman period. Israel doesn't give a fuck. They'll just blow them up. Maybe they'll seize them and then blow it up. Palestinian residents of Safiya say that the ruins bear witness to Palestine's centuries of interactions with conquering empires, while revealing Palestine's impact on those empires in return. The archaeological park itself falls under full Israeli military control as part of Area C, but most of the village is part of Area B, which falls under joint Israeli-Palestinian jurisdiction according to the demarcations of the 93 Oslo Accords. How long before they just decide that they're no longer going to honor any of those anymore? What is most notable about the latest seizure order is that it encroaches upon land and properties in Area B and stands to change residents' lives forever, particularly if soldiers are permanently stationed inside the village or archaeological park, and if settler visits become more regular. In May of 2023, in a precursor to the national park plans, the Israeli government approved a 30 million shekel, which is more than $8 million, schemed to restore Sebastia's archaeological park and establish a tourism center, new access roads, and expand their own military presence. So basically, they're going to steal it and use it as a tourist site. The Israeli civil administration has also submitted orders for new roads to connect the surrounding settlements. Of course, that will further cut off the people who live there, or they'll just dispossess them. Nihad Abadi, a 65-year-old farmer and father of 6 in Sebastia, owns a farm and hundreds of precious olive trees that have been passed down through generations. As Israel's long-threatened annexation of the northern West Bank village moves a step closer, Abadi and his family face losing all of it. Why? If they want to kill us in our own home, let them come and do it. I won't just leave my house. I built it with my own hands, stone by stone. If I lose this place, there's nowhere else for my family to go. Fear is always here now in Sebastia, but you have to live with it. You can't let it take over. Maps included in Israel's order showed the seized area covers hundreds of private plots containing 5,700 olive trees, the lifeblood of Sebastia's economy, according to the municipality. So they'll steal that land. My guess is they'll bulldoze the trees just out of spite. They've been doing that all winter long that we've seen. Abadi spoke to Mondo Weiss from his increasingly dilapidated family home, which he's been unable to renovate or improve due to restrictions from Israeli authorities. Equal rights, right? Equal rights. They treat Palestinians equally, right? It falls just within the boundaries of the land Israel, of course, plans to seize, an area equivalent to about 275 football fields. That's big. That is a big area. The West Bank isn't that big. What is left of Abadi's land, which once generated him a small fortune by Sebastia's standards, is loomed over by the illegal Israeli settlement of Shavei Shomron. Abadi tells Mondo Weiss that his father remains in his late grandfather's home, marooned on the other side of the highway from his son and nestled beneath the imposing militarized perimeter of the settlement. This is what I mean by cutting off the territory. Marooned, meaning that he can't get to his kids. As for himself, he's now unable to farm the 3,000 square meter plot that he owns and the 75 acres of land that he was leasing. Why? Because of settler attacks, rising costs, and the presence of the Israeli military for his turn in fortunes. They just rob him. He estimates that he's lost more than over $90,000 in just the past 3 years. They didn't put any effort into this land, he said. We and our ancestors worked it. We poured our sweat into this land. I'm more connected to it than anyone else. I was born and raised on it. Again, settlers claiming that this was theirs from 3,000 years ago. No, it's not theirs or even their ancestors, because you won't even take a fucking DNA test to prove, but these guys would. Israel confiscated much of my family's lands, annexing it to the settlement. But even so, we didn't leave. Many of Abadi's neighbors on the northwestern outskirts of the village are also facing displacement, but are too afraid to discuss their situation for fear of Israeli reprisal. I don't blame them. Sebastia residents had been afforded just 14 days to object to the plans through the Israeli legal system. Yeah, like they're going to expedite this for a Palestinian village. Like hundreds of other villagers, Abadi rushed to submit documents to local authorities that prove his ownership of his home and land in an attempt to block the seizures, but of course, they don't give a fuck, and they don't want anyone to see those documents. Here's another one. Lifelong Sebastia resident and activist Ahmad Kayed, 60, said that the village was in a state of emergency, with residents more afraid than ever of displacement and intensifying military police. Local officials, including Sabatia Mayor Mohammed Azim, have condemned the international community for ignoring their continual pleas for support. Mayor Azim conceded the future for the village is dark and bleak, and previously warned rivers of blood would run through the streets if Israel's plans become a reality. Israel's unprecedented land seizure comes as a forced displacement in rural areas and refugee camps runs rampant and settler violence reaches record levels. And there's a whole Mondo Waste article about that from October. Okay, here's another one. Israeli anti-settlement heritage organization Emek Shaveh said Sabatia would become the fifth historical site in the West Bank to be expropriated since 1967. Moreover, the seizure would be the largest of any archaeologically significant area in the state's history. We shouldn't even be recognizing it as a state at this point. Israel. It's not a state. It's a terrorist entity that keeps stealing land from the people that had it beforehand. Because in England gifted it. It's the most insane shit ever. Celebrating the move, an Israeli minister of heritage, all these lunatic rabid Zionists, Amichai Eliyahu, himself an illegal settler, said that the flag of an invented people will be removed from Sabatia, and the flag of the Jewish people will be raised in its place. Every accusation is a confession. The only invented flag is the Israeli flag. Local municipality figures, the Palestinian Minister for Tourism and Antiquities, Hani Al-Hayek, and representatives from Emek Shaveh have met in Sabatia several times over the last month to work on a public information campaign and a last-ditch effort for UNESCO World Heritage recognition and international support. Futile. Valiant, but likely to be futile, unfortunately. At the first meeting on November 22nd, it was confirmed that the order will also entail the takeover of 2 cultural heritage gift shops, a factory, and 550 agricultural plots. Why? And how are they compensating the people that they're stealing this from? Since 2020, the village has lost about 700 olive trees and 750 apricot trees due to the settler damage and Israeli land seizures. Fuck Israel. Land thieves not compensating, even if they would accept any compensation. Sabatia is now surrounded by checkpoints. The illegal Israeli settlements of Shavei Shomron and Homesh, as well as dozens of official settler encampments obstructing access to vast swaths of Palestinian land. They want to cut off their access and make these parcels smaller and smaller and cut off communication between the villages even. Hayed said that the village has been under siege since Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin war criminal Netanyahu's far-right ultra-nationalist coalition rose to power in 2022. About 40 families have left Sabatia after military invasions have become incessant. I don't blame them. Again, where do you go? It's not like they've got hotel rooms down the street. It's like an earthquake or a bomb has hit us, he said after the order was submitted. We've never been so worried for the future of our village, and we feel alone. No one has listened to us. God, this sounds awfully familiar. He says that the Israeli army intends to make life unbearable for residents until they either leave Sabatia or are forced out. This is their plan. They starve them. They shoot at them. They raid their houses. They start blowing up the houses. And everybody left gets killed or starts mass being displaced, kicked out door to door, and kicked down a road. We've seen those exiles before. Those Nakbas. Excavations at the site, again, Here we go. Settler politicians and ultra-nationalist ministers visited and announced their intentions to create Samaria National Park in May earlier this year. Just as another big fuck you to the Palestinians. Excavations at the site began soon after, despite being condemned as illegal by the Palestinian Ministry of Tourism and Antiquities and a host of civil society bodies. They don't give a fuck. Defaced by Israeli settlers. That's the western wall of Sebastia's archaeological site, defaced by Israeli settlers with a Star of David. Figures on the Israeli far right refer to Sebastia as Samaria or Shomron in Hebrew and claim it was the capital of the biblical kingdom of Israel nearly 3 millennia ago. But most historians believe the northern kingdom lasted for under 200 years, while Palestinian culture has interacted with ruling empires from the Bronze Age through to the Ottoman period. Heritage Minister Eliyahu stated on social media that Sebastia, the capital of the ancient kingdom of Israel, has been neglected. The minister accused the Palestinian Authority of paving over Israeli history, fuck them, and dumping waste on Jewish relics, again, Zionist, not Jewish, adding that Jews will no longer be expelled from their historic homeland. Okay, you pushed them there. You realize that. That was all their land. It wasn't their... Wow. Any American that goes along with this, I hope, is just prepared to give up their home to a Native American, because you're literally advocating for the same exact thing. Eliyahu's office told the media in May that there is no evidence of any Palestinian history in the village's archaeological park. That is such bullshit. It's just Hasbara. 5,000 years of history. No evidence. They just make shit up. Yet the Ottoman architecture, Hellenistic Western Wall, the ruins of a Byzantine basilica, a Roman forum and amphitheater, the remains of the Temple of Augustus tell a different story. The Crusader-era Church of St. John, rebuilt into a mosque, is believed to be the site of the tomb of John the Baptist, known in the Quran as the prophet Yahya, and has been a pilgrimage site for centuries. Sebastia is one of 63 sites in the West Bank that have been designated by the war criminal as an Israeli heritage site. Again, just making shit up. There is no such thing. World Heritage Sites is. For years, the Israeli military has surveilled the site and forcibly blocked the Palestinian Authority and the municipality from carrying out any excavations, cleaning, and restoration work. I wonder why. Maybe they would actually find even more Palestinian artifacts that Israel certainly doesn't want to find, because then it would debunk this whole Israeli artifact nonsense. Ghazal accuses Israel of perpetrating a crime against history, calling for support from historians, universities, and academics around the world before it's too late. I think it already is. The confiscation order is becoming of a nightmare we had long feared. Our village has witnessed the rise and fall of many civilizations, but this does not give anyone the right to claim ownership except for the rightful landowners who have lived on this land for generations. What is happening is the illegal theft of knowledge and heritage, and the erasure of people's existence and history. Each of the civilizations that have passed through the village left its mark, which collectively forms the historical fabric of Palestine. Let us act now, not just to protect the village, but to defend a living archaeological site whose people still have access to it, enjoy its presence, and live alongside it. I don't know how much they're visiting it, honestly, right now, but it's theirs. It belongs to them. It does not belong to Israel, whether they believe it or not. Ghazal says that less than 10% of the archaeological park had been properly excavated, and the people of Sebastia have been denied the chance to unearth more of their own collective heritage. The Israeli government also issued an order last July to build a military outpost at the scenic summit of Sebastia's archaeological park. Construction has not yet begun, nor should it ever. In addition, the government has outlined plans to build a defense station at the historic Masudia station, part of the Ottoman Hejaz Railway, less than 2 miles away from the village. Again, they're just going to raise the whole thing and rebuild it however they want. Yossi Dagan, chairman of the Shomron Medical Council that governs 35 illegal West Bank settlements, visited the site like a parasite with other settlers and construction vehicles in late November to celebrate the beginning of renovation works. This week, a metal gate's been constructed by the military at the entrance to the station. The train is rolling. Terrible. Again, there we go. I said something about a Nakba, Sebastia's second Nakba. Since October 7, 2023, Israeli military violence in the West Bank and the village of Sebastia has intensified. There have been at least 25 gunshot injuries in the village. And I'm guessing that it wasn't due to Palestinian on Palestinian violence. Many involving children. Well over 15 village residents have been arrested, 7 of whom are still detained because Israel loves to illegally detain children in torture prisons. Like a 14-year-old, Ahmad Jazar he was shot dead by Israeli soldiers in June last year. And Fauzi Makalfe, 19, was killed a year before. Teenager Nawal Sholi and 27-year-old Ayman Shaer were both disabled after being shot in the thigh by soldiers exploding bullets. Again, not Palestinian on Palestinian violence, but the IDF targeting and injuring and maiming and permanently disabling Palestinians. Don't sugarcoat it. Israel's repression has become so severe that even peaceful protests have become too dangerous, Mayor Azim told Mondoweiss, expressing fears over losing many more village residents. I don't blame them. Go start. Israel has killed over 380,000 infants under 5. Allegedly, but sure, 680,000 dead is the latest number. Wombat, could see you. We're fully aware of the military's brutality and violence and how it kills anyone who stands in the deep sense of pride and the strong will of the people of Sebastia to protect and preserve their cultural and historical heritage and to defend their property. Traders told Mondoweiss they fear displacement and have lost over 3/4 of their business as tourism plummeted since October 7th. I didn't even know there was tourism in the West Bank, but I guess many owners have already moved their restaurants and stores to other locations in the village to avoid reprisals from the military, until the military just takes that too. An average of 150,000 international tourists, Christian pilgrims, and Palestinians from across the West Bank would visit Sebastia annually before October 7th. See that? Now there are fewer than 500 guests per month, the municipality says. And my guess is that's also because Israel doesn't allow them in. Again, reminding people that Israel's excavations have killed olive trees that are more than 1,000 years old. Why? Out of spite. While speaking with Mondoweiss, Kayed said he doesn't want to imagine life without the views from the hillsides of the archaeological park, the most beautiful place to admire the sunset in Palestine. Kayed reminisces about planting olive trees with his late mother while taking phone calls from international journalists and national ambassadors. Some of the trees his family and other villagers had nurtured had been uprooted by recent Israeli excavations or burned by settlers. These trees are part of our life, part of our soul. But we can't even reach our land now. We can't feed ourselves. Now Kayed believes that the village faces a second Nakba, and he's right. He gestures towards a particularly charred and decaying tree, with Sebastia's dramatic Roman-era Western Wall behind it, whose stones were defaced by Israeli settler graffiti depicting Stars of David. Ours is the story of these trees, he said. They want us to die as these trees have. Then he points to a tree stump spouting fresh shoots, but we will learn from them, and we will grow again. Oh, man. And again, that picture of the tree burned out with the defaced Roman wall. Why? Just because they can, just because. Fuck Israel. Next, I just wanted to call attention to the fact that it has now been 354 days since Israel abducted Dr. Hussam Abu Safiya. Free Dr. Hussam Abu Safiya. Right, there's a whole thing about the Samir Project, talking about what's going on and how much it's costing right now a family to be able to buy shelter, $250 to $500 for a tent, $200 to $260 for tarps, $55 to $60 for a blanket. Yeah. But what's more interesting is that now American soldiers are being killed in Syria. And of course, we know that that's really just because of Israel. So fuck Israel for this, because now Americans are being murdered. This is Jason Ditz over at Indie Media Award winner Anti-War. Okay. 2 U.S. soldiers and 1 civilian killed in an attack on Syria's Palmyra. The joint patrol targeted by a lone gunman. Several U.S. and Syrian personnel were also wounded. So what happened here? Yeah, update. Here's more details on the attack and the perpetrator. But before we get to that, an apparently insider attack in the ancient Syrian city of Palmyra has left a number of U.S. casualties after an apparent ISIS infiltrator to the local security forces attacked a joint U.S.-Syrian patrol that was conducting a field tour of the area. Unbelievable. The gunman opened fire on the patrol and killed two U.S. soldiers and 1 U.S. civilian. 3 additional U.S. soldiers and 2 Syrian troops were also reported wounded in the incident. The gunman, who has not yet been publicly identified, at least as of this article, was reportedly killed in the exchange. The attacker has been widely reported as a member of local security forces without detail, though the Syrian Observatory for Human Rights initially reported him as a member of the security forces. Subsequent Reuters reports also cited officials stating that he was a security force member, but not a high-ranking one. I don't believe Reuters for a second. The joint delegation fled to the U.S. base in Al-Tanf along the southern Syrian border and took the wounded with them for treatment there. In the course of the movement, the main Syrian highway connecting the capital Damascus to the eastern Deir ez-Zor governorate was blocked to all traffic, and the area was placed under high alert. That seems a little concerning. A second attack by ISIS was reported further east in the town of Al-Taqihi. Now, wait a minute. Isn't Al-Jalani or whatever, Al-Shara, ISIS, ex-ISIS? So are his guys doing this? 1 ISIS gunman was killed there, and the commander and 1 of his escorts were reported wounded. So, again, ISIS cell attempted to assassinate a commander of the Kurdish SDF. I thought the Kurds were on our side. I thought ISIS is kind of on our side. Awfully confusing. U.S. Ambassador to Turkey Tom Barrack, who also was in the Epstein files and very close with Epstein, by the way, was quoted as condemning the cowardly terrorist attack, quote unquote, and reaffirmed the U.S. partnership with the Islamist Syrian government to continue to fight terrorism in the country. Trump vowed a very serious retaliation, which they announced today isn't going to really be a very serious retaliation. Don't worry about it, bro. We got it. ISIS has long sought to reassert itself after losing materially all the territory that it once held in both Syria and Iraq. The group retains capability to operate in eastern Syria, as is evidence today, continue to try to conduct high-profile attacks when the opportunity presents itself. Because why not? Historically, U.S.-backed Kurdish forces have been on the front lines against ISIS in that part of Syria. Again, we back Kurds, and we back... Notice, ISIS doesn't attack any Muslim countries. Okay. Or they don't attack Israel, more like, and any ones that are friendly to Israel. Weird. But U.S. efforts to get the SDF to integrate outright into the Syrian military have complicated matters, and the sometimes tense relationship on the ground between the Syrian army and the Kurds may be giving ISIS more leeway to operate in that region. ISIS is the Syrian army, I thought. I would need to talk with Vanessa Beeley and or Eva Bartlett to understand a little bit more about the dynamic there, and I would highly recommend following both of them. All right, and then I've got one other thing here when it comes to fuck Israel this week from the Palestine Chronicle, Indie Media Award honoree Robert Inlakesh. Okay, why Israel is pushing for regime change in Venezuela through Washington? Weird. But remember that Maduro is one of the most outspoken critics of Israel. So, one of Washington's pro-Israel think tanks, like the Foundation for Defense of Democracies, are pumping out articles groveling over the prospect of controlling the nation's oil. Of course they are. But not only is the pro-regime Venezuelan opposition allied with the Israeli Likud party, no surprise, but toppling the government in Caracas directly serves Israel's regional agenda. How? This is why pro-Israeli commentators are adamant that the U.S. military intervene and put American lives on the line. While parallels are beginning to be drawn between the build-up to the Iraq War and the Trump administration's regime change propaganda against Venezuela, one key similarity is being conveniently left out of the picture. Do tell, Robert. Israeli war criminal Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu is infamous for cheerleading the U.S.'s illegal invasion of Iraq in 2003, a war which Israel refused to fight in itself, of course, but nonetheless lobbied for and encouraged through its allied neoconservative think tanks in D.C. Again, history repeating itself here again, despite the White House recently releasing a new 33-page national security strategy document in which the U.S. declared that it's no longer seeking to engage in nation-building wars and that the days of regime change operations to export American values are over. God, I wish. The current administration is threatening just that against Venezuela. It is additionally aiming to achieve this outcome in Gaza through its UNSC-approved Gaza quote-unquote ceasefire plan, even though they haven't ceased fire like for a day, and they keep murdering Palestinians. The parallels to the buildup to the Iraq War couldn't be any starker. Pro-Trump conservative commentators are currently salivating at the prospect of getting their hands on that Venezuelan oil. They want to tap that oil, like I said last week. In addition to this, the false charge that Venezuela is somehow responsible for the U.S.'s fentanyl crisis has led to labeling the Venezuelan president, Nicolas Maduro's government, as a narco-terrorist regime. Which is, again, insane. Because the fentanyl is coming from Mexico, but it's also coming from Colombia and Peru and Argentina. However, and also from here, if you listen to what Trump administration officials are using as a justification for their goal of toppling Maduro, they consistently accuse Caracas of allying with Hamas and Hasbara. Some pro-Israeli commentators even claim that Hezbollah and Hamas could be preparing attacks on the U.S. homeland. Not only an audacious and illogical charge, but one with not a shred of evidence to back it up. Why would they need evidence? Trust me, bro. False flag. It's coming. 9/11 style attack. Isn't that what Laura Looney said? These are also not the enemies of the U.S., but instead the enemies of Israel, making it more suspicious as to why there's such a hyper-focus on this issue. For example, Venezuelan opposition leader, clown show Maria Corina Machado, who also was the Nobel Peace Prize Award honoree, recently spoke at a conference in Oslo and was asked to address the issue of U.S. intervention in her country. And her response was to declare that her country had already been invaded. Maduro was democratically elected twice. We have the Iranian agents. We have the terrorist groups such as Hezbollah, Hamas, operating freely in accordance with the regime, Machado claimed, in order to justify the invasion of her nation. Absolutely pulled it right out of her ass. And right out of CIA talking points. The U.S. also recently released footage of its illegal theft of a Venezuelan oil tanker, justifying this move by claiming it was used to transfer Iranian oil. It's of note that Tehran's relationship with Caracas is frequently cited as if it represents a threat to the United States. Moves like the recent tanker seizure represent a step that is an aggression toward Iran by proxy. So yes, if the oil is Iranian, and I don't think that anybody proved that it was in this case, that certainly is an escalation with Iran. Donald Trump, whose long-desired Nobel Peace Prize was stolen away by the pro-war Venezuelan opposition leader he backed to overthrow Maduro, attempts to pride himself on the idea that he's a broker of peace and opposed to regime change wars. Wait, what? Yet between March and May, he launched a failed war on Yemen, sending all their heads of state there, followed directly by striking Iran in June, both acts committed solely for the sake of Israel. Fuck Israel. This is odd. They must have blackmail material on him. Like bad. Like not what, the Putin stuff. Obviously, again, it's projection. Washington's pro-Israel think tanks, like the Foundation for the Defense of Democracies, are pumping out articles groveling over the prospect of controlling the nation's oil, but also ensuring that the new Venezuela is led by a U.S. puppet regime who will cut ties with Israel's enemies. In a new article written by the FDD's senior Iran and financial economics advisor, Saeed Ghassaminejad, it spells out in a tone of certainty that a new regime in Caracas would sever ties with Iran. Tehran uses Venezuela as a base for expanding its jihadi influence in America's backyard. Wait a minute. Venezuela is now America's backyard? A U.S.-aligned Caracas would kick the Iranian agents out, making the southern border and homeland more secure. Sure it would. Because the logic there is just insane. Because our homeland security would have it easier with a U.S. puppet dictator in charge in Venezuela. No, they would just control the flow of drugs more tightly if there were any drugs that were coming up. But this is all just narrative so that they can justify bombing to steal the oil. The Atlantic Council think tank has even claimed that Lebanese Hezbollah has helped to turn Venezuela into a hub for the convergence of transnational organized crime and international terrorism. This is the if you're not with us, you're against us. In fact, some of the same issue brief that was published back on October 7th, 2020, entitled The Maduro-Hezbollah Nexus, How Iran-Backed Networks Prop Up the Venezuelan Regime. That came straight out of CIA headquarters in Langley, right out of somebody's asshole. You see the think tank use the term narco-terrorism. That's probably the first documented use of it. The Atlantic Council blames Israel's enemies for this, allegedly setting up a narco-terrorism conspiracy that involved the dissidents of the FARC, drug cartels in Mexico, the Islamic Republic of Iran, Syria, and the Lebanese terrorist group Hezbollah. And a partridge in a pear tree with the Backstreet Boys and an appearance by Will Ferrell at the end, dressed as George W. Bush. Are you fucking kidding me? That's the Atlantic Council. They're out of their minds. Such an obsessive focus on this fact-free conspiracy theory, that literally is a conspiracy theory, because it has no facts and it's just speculation, which points a finger at a who's who of Israel's enemies. Recently roping in Hamas also is not by accident, nor is the pledge of allegiance to Israel by the Venezuelan opposition. While it is clear that Venezuela is allied with Iran and collaborates with it as a means of navigating the world under crushing U.S. sanctions, something they have in common, these conspiracy theories presented by pro-Israel think tanks, Israel lobby-sponsored politicians, and Israeli-aligned media outlets are about as serious as the claims that led to the Iraq War, in terms of the evidence to back them up. But we all see how that turned out. Another motivating factor in Israel's desire to see the Venezuelan state toppled is the emergence of what is now being called the Isaac Accords. So you had the Abraham Accords. Now you've got the Isaac Accords. Okay? They're going into this biblical historical nonsense. This initiative was announced publicly by Argentine President Javier Milei late last month. Now remember that Milei is far distant cousins with Benjamin Mileikowski. Yes, they are related. What a weird coincidence that is, that he rose to be president of Argentina and then drove their entire economy into the ground within a year and then lost power, failing to rope more major Arab and Muslim nations into the Trump administration's so-called Abraham Accords. The Israeli government is now setting its sights on Latin America. The Isaac Accords demonstrate an active push from Israel to expand its influence in the Western Hemisphere. Disgusting. Left-wing movements and governments in Latin America have historically stood with the Palestinian cause, a legacy of unified resistance to imperialism that lasts until this day. If Venezuela's government is toppled, it's predicted that there will be a domino-style effect, knocking out other left-wing governments in the region, or at least the U.S. will move on to the next targets, which means both Cuba and Nicaragua will be in the firing line. In order for Tel Aviv to prove successful in its Isaac Accords mission, it needs U.S.-funded parties to win elections, and for Washington to carry out regime change operations. I put the win in quotes, in air quotes, for those who can't see me, which is everyone. But carry out regime change operations across the region. I wonder how they're going to do that. Maybe with CIA and NED or State Department, which they now brought back in-house. The only country that appears immune to this strategy for now is Brazil under Lula, because Lula's also playing ball already to a point. Everywhere else, including Colombia, the Israelis have the perfect men in office. No, not Colombia, to pursue this strategy to its bitter end. Take Marco Rubio, who's not only the recipient of at least over $1 million in Israel lobby funds, but has a personal animus toward the Cuban leadership as a member of that nation's broadly pro-regime change diaspora. Rubio understands full well the regime change in Caracas leads to toppling the government in Havana. I'm sure Snowhimbo would just be thrilled to hear about that. While Israel is not the sole driver of the U.S. Trump administration's regime change agenda in Venezuela, it is undeniable that it's a factor, and it will certainly benefit from the outcome. They're all on board with it because they all benefit from it equally. Again, support Robert Inlakesh, support Palestine Chronicle as well. They've been under attack. We did a story earlier this year about Ramzi Baroud and him being under attack, and them trying to have some of his articles censored and one of his speaking engagements canceled. But yeah, Robert Inlakesh, Indie Media Award honoree, class of I think 2023, maybe 24, for top journalist. Man, he's really good. I like Robert, and that concludes, thankfully, for tonight, the Fuck Israel, Free Palestine segment. Now, let me tell you, last night, somebody actually made me think, because I have been doing this all as Fuck Israel, because this is mostly about what Israel has been doing to the Palestinians. But I really should put more focus, on Free Palestine. So Free Palestine. Right. And then, yeah, Hemkar is putting scripture up. The Hebrew word is harem. Yes, thank you, Hemkar, over on Rumble. These people actually have supported INN, so we love them and deeply appreciate them. The ways to join them would be to use Cash App, $ Indie News Network is our handle over there. ko-fi.com/Indie News Network. Over at paypal.me/Indie News Network. We've got patreon.com/Indie News Network. We've got 10 paid subscribers over there too. Thank you so much to everyone who supports over there. Our website at IndieNewsNow.com. There is a section to keep the media free. You can click there and leave a tip for INN. And then we've got INN Newsletter and IndieMediaToday.com over at Substack. You can subscribe monthly or annually at either one of those places. And thank you for everyone on that board that already does so. And the people that are highlighted in yellow, by the way, are people that have given extra amounts and repeatedly over time and have really gone out of their way to support our network, and we deeply appreciate them. So thank you, really. Support independent media because we need it more than ever, fam. I love you all. We'll see you soon. Have a good night, everyone. No! We just fucking lost the stream!
I guess this isn't such an awful place. Is that what you want me to say? You prove it's possible to sleep for days, and I still think you're right here awake. The cost of living isn't much to me, but God, it's so hard to say. And when they told you everything was safe, were you safe? Were you safe?
Who are these people?
Fuck Israel Tide. All right. Two separate articles here that are pointing out and calling out, and I really like this writer for Left Voice. Left Voice is an Indie Media Award honoree. One of the better outlets out there when it comes to anti-imperialist reporting, when it comes to reporting from a socialist perspective, from calling out the duopoly, and really hoping and moving toward and planning toward and organizing toward a socialist world. Despite the ceasefire, Israel is still committing genocide in Gaza. Otto Fors, I brought articles from him before, and I really like his writing specifically over there. He's one of the writers that I really appreciate. Teresa Cozzarelli and Luigi Morris are two other ones I think are outstanding. There's also somebody in the Detroit area that talks about organizing. We've covered a couple of his articles too. Can't remember his name off the top of my head. So Otto writes that despite the ceasefire implemented in October, Israel is still committing genocide in Gaza and moving ahead with its plans to ethnically cleanse and occupy the Strip and the West Bank. The movement for Palestine must respond. Look at those piles of rubble. Those were people's homes. Those were apartment buildings. Those were stores. That was life. Israel's genocide, let me make this a little bigger, against Palestine has continued unabated since the ceasefire, quote unquote, implemented on October 10th. In the past 2 months, Israeli airstrikes and gunfire have killed nearly 400 people, an average of nearly 5 per day, and injured nearly 1,000 in the Gaza Strip. And we all know that their hospital facilities are worn down and stressed out. All told, officials in Gaza say that the Zionist state has committed around 800 ceasefire violations, threatening to derail the second phase of the deal, which was Netanyahu's plan the entire time. In addition to the continued bombing campaigns, Israel is also preventing much-needed aid from reaching Palestinians. The number of aid trucks is far below the terms agreed to in the ceasefire, let alone enough to rebuild the enclave. Again, part of the plan. Israel's genocidal campaign has destroyed or damaged over 80% of all buildings, ruined 95% of farmlands, and decimated sanitation systems. As a result of this destruction, at least a dozen people have been killed during heavy rains that have collapsed more houses, and also freezing in tents. Israel is also moving full steam ahead on its plan to annex the Strip. Although the ceasefire stipulates that Israeli forces are meant to withdraw from Gaza, the Zionist state has continued to keep troops in the Strip, retaining control of 58% of the territory. Last I checked, that was more than half. Israel is also attempting to make the new occupation permanent. Chief of the General Staff of the IOF has said that the yellow line, which currently marks the IOF's limits, is the new border line. So they just stole all that land. And by the way, they just moved the line inward even further. That's the yellow line. So literally, right from the Rafah gate, the Rafah crossing, notice that there's a big space there, and there's a big space to the north too, and there's a space to the west. They literally have cut it off all around. And anywhere that wildlife used to potentially grow has been cut off and decimated. Israel's ethnic cleansing campaign isn't limited to Gaza, as we've also been talking about repeatedly and at length. Palestinians in the West Bank are experiencing the highest level of violence since the 1967 start of the occupation. Since October of 2023, more than 1,000 have been killed, including 277 this year alone. Again, there's no Hamas in the West Bank. They just want to steal the territory. In addition to deadly shootings, Palestinians in the West Bank are exposed to raids, beatings, arbitrary arrest, and prison torture, in addition to having their land stolen and their houses boarded. This situation makes clear that this is a ceasefire in name only, and Israel will not stop committing genocide and ethnically cleansing Palestinians, whether in Gaza or in the West Bank. U.S. imperialism, particularly President Trump's colonial 20-point quote-unquote peace plan, bullshit, cannot guarantee a ceasefire nor protect Palestinians. We also cannot rely on European countries, which, just like the U.S., continue to provide aid to Israel, like Germany, which has resumed armed shipments, even though that is aiding in genocide and a war crime in itself. For their part, the regimes of the countries in the region, including Egypt, Jordan, Saudi Arabia, the UAE, and Turkey, have also been complicit in the genocide and backed Trump's plan despite popular demonstrations against Israel. Those are all part of the Abraham Accords, I believe. For instance, the Sisi government in Egypt has helped enforce the Rafah border closure and keep Gaza isolated, all while deporting activists attempting to break the siege of Gaza. They are also doing that because they don't want 500,000 or more Palestinians coming into Egypt and living there as refugees. They can't really handle that influx of people. Instead, the Palestine movement across the world must return, showing its full solidarity with people in Gaza and the West Bank. We've seen powerful demonstrations of this force across the world in recent years, like the hundreds of thousands who've marched in cities across Europe, the youth occupations in both Europe and the United States, and the global Samud flotilla. Key to this fight is the labor movement. Workers make the economy run, and they can grind the gears of imperialism like arms shipments to a halt. Workers in Italy recently showed the way forward, going on strike to protest the genocide. Until the genocidal state of Israel and its imperialist accomplices are defeated, the global working class cannot stop fighting for Palestinian liberation. Also, Oakland, California. I know they're also refusing to load ships that have arms going to Israel. Okay. So, in a very similar vein, Dave DeCamp over at Anti-War, also Indie Media Award honorees, both as the journalist and the outlet. Israel has killed over 400 Palestinians in Gaza since Trump-backed ceasefire went into effect. So again, they update that number. Again, 401 Palestinians and 1,108 wounded since the ceasefire was supposed to go into effect. Remember what Refaat Alareer said, ceasefire means that everyone ceases and Israel follows. Health Ministry statement came a day after the Israeli military bombed a school sheltering displaced Palestinians in Gaza City's Tufa neighborhood. Israeli shelling hit the school when families were gathered there to celebrate a wedding, and the attack killed 6 people, including a 4-month-old baby and his father. Because fuck Israel. Israel continued launching attacks in Gaza on Sunday, killing at least 3 people in Gaza City's Shujaya neighborhood, according to the Palestinian news agency Wafa. If confirmed by the health ministry, it would bring the total number of people killed during the so-called ceasefire to 404. 3 women were also killed in Gaza on Sunday when a building damaged by Israel's bombing campaign collapsed in Gaza City's Sheikh Radwan neighborhood, which has become a common occurrence due to strong winds amid harsh weather. Although the 2 Palestinians were missing under rubble after the building collapse, again according to Wafa. 5 babies, according to them, have also died due to cold, as many families are living in flimsy tents that were flooded in recent heavy rain. The U.S. and Israel, again, are not allowing reconstruction to take place in the Hamas-controlled side of Gaza, where virtually all civilians are living, and Israel has maintained restrictions on aid entering the Strip. And remember, if they cross the yellow line, they're treated as if they are combatants and killed. So they can only live in this area where no aid is allowed, where they're not allowed to rebuild, where they're not allowed to have warmth, where they're not allowed to have tents. Children are losing their lives because they lack the most basic items for survival. Babies are arriving to the hospital cold with near-death vital signs. Even our best efforts are not nearly enough. They say the war has ended, but people are still having to fight for their lives. Doctors Without Borders also called for Israel to lift all restrictions on aid entering Gaza. Of course, as Gaza is battered by heavy rains and storms, hundreds of thousands of Palestinians continue to struggle in flooded and broken makeshift tents. MSF calls on Israeli authorities to urgently allow a massive scale-up of aid into the Strip. But that would actually expose what Israel's been doing the whole time. and actual people from the West would be able to see it and photograph it and document it and tell everyone else. And they would rather that not happen. Thank you very much. Because fuck Israel. Next. God, this woman deserves a Nobel Prize herself. Asal Rod, professor, writer. She writes over at New Arab, fellow at the Arab Center. Okay. She has been one of the strongest advocates for Miss Rachel. She's the headline fixer, I call her. She likes to remind corporate news outlets at how much they're whitewashing genocide. So Miss Rachel reminds people that Palestinian children have human rights. Stop violating them. They have the right to education. Okay. She calls out to me, teacher, I fill up the water and come back quickly. How Palestinian children in Gaza are robbed of their right to education. There was also a documentary about Hind Rajab that came out, and I saw the IDF actually put a t-shirt on her of their own, acting like Hamas was the ones that killed Hind. Absolute disgrace, gaslighting. 355 bullets from IDF soldiers, IDF cowards, with the rest of her family and medics. We're still relying on Miss Rachel to advocate for the rights of Palestinian children because world leaders refuse to do so. Follow Asal Rod over on Twitter or over on Substack if you can. If you're not already, what are you doing? All right, here we go. The Associated Press, and we talked about West Bank earlier. How about Israel's cabinet approving a proposal for 19 new settlements in the occupied West Bank? And Smotrich is claiming that Netanyahu was the one insisting, but we all know that all of them are down with it and have been fighting for it and pushing for it. They're just pushing bullshit. Fuck Israel for that. Next, I had a question about how this guy happened to get in. Israel, for whatever reason, must have been shamed into allowing a Catholic cardinal from the Vatican, okay, Cardinal Pizzaballa, which is a great name for an Italian Catholic, Pizzaballa. Displaced Christian children, descendants of one of the very oldest Christian communities, sing carols to welcome Cardinal Pizzaballa to Gaza yesterday to visit one of the few Catholic churches that are still remaining. Amazing. That they had all these Santa hats even. They must have brought them in, see how clean they are. Because after 2 years of bombing, you know that there's nowhere to get clean Santa hats in Palestine. Okay. More about Pizzaballa. Ihab Hassan says, Cardinal Pier Battista Pizzaballa, the Latin Patriarch of Jerusalem, visits the Holy Family Catholic Parish in Gaza City ahead of Christmas and will lead the Christmas Mass there. An extraordinary cardinal. So a little bit of light, a little bit of positivity, a little bit of happiness. And look at this scene, which is, again, horrific. Cardinal, again, Pizzaballa, goes to different displacement camps in Gaza City. This looks like it's AI. This looks like ChatGPT. Could you imagine? Look at these. We are causing this. Children to have to live in tents on beaches like Bedouins. And there's this cardinal blessing the area for whatever that's worth. At least he's trying. Then there's this motherfucker, Jonathan Greenblatt. And I'm not a big fan of InfoLib News or Chris Menahan, but when they call it out, they call it out, they call it out. This is unbelievable. This is an admission by Jonathan Greenblatt, head of the ADL. The 7 largest Jewish communities on earth hold bi-weekly Zoom meetings organized by the ADL to share tips and draft legislation that might work in other countries to advance their people's agenda. What people is that? This is a Zionist thing, not a Jewish thing. We have meetings that are some off the record, some on the record, with world leaders in which we share our community's concerns and call for action. But they don't control the media or anything. Don't accuse them of controlling the media or politics or anything else.
Now, just last week, leaders of the world's 7 largest Jewish communities convened in Australia as part of the 2025 J7 Summit. This is a summit organized by ADL as part of the J7 Task Force to combat anti-Semitism, a convening of representative bodies of the largest Jewish communities on earth.
So the J7, as we said, is comprised of the 7 largest diaspora communities. We meet every other week via Zoom to share information, to share best practices. We share what worked for our communities, what hasn't worked, what might work elsewhere. We have shared tips or draft legislation that might work in other countries or spoken of different litigation. A lot of what has been very important has been this consultation where we can learn from each other, learn the trends that are coming in, learn the techniques that others have used successfully, and what might be coming our way. Because what happened in Montreal could happen in Melbourne, and what happens in New York or London or Paris will make its way to Buenos Aires. That's number one. Number two, we do speak in one voice in certain aspects on key advocacy. So, for example, when we left Australia, our call to action was on the Australian government to move forward the Special Envoy Gillian Siegel's plan on anti-Semitism, which has been stalled for a number of months, to accept it and to implement it.
So we'll false flag in any country where this thing is on the table. The
7 largest diaspora communities went to Australia to show solidarity publicly with the community, with government leaders in the media, and also make this joint call to action. Finally, we have meetings that are some off the record, some on the record with world leaders in which we share our community's concerns and call for action. So it's both a really important body for consultation and learning from each other, as well as an effective tool when we can come together and speak in one voice.
Coordinating talking points across multiple resources, but they don't control anything and they're not coordinating anything, guys. Don't accuse them of anything like that because they just admitted it openly, but don't accuse them. Fuck Israel. Again, not Jewish communities, Zionist communities. This is specifically to support and defend and fund and censor over Zionism, not Judaism. Judaism is not Zionism. Zionism is not Judaism. More Christian Zionists in the United States than there are Jews worldwide. And there are many Jews that are not Zionists, that do not support Israel, like this one right here, like a couple that are in this chat right here. Now, we've talked about Zionist and specifically IDF infiltration into big tech extensively. How they have hired Unit 8200 people, which is the tech division of the IDF, in just about every social media company and Google and Apple. And well, now, as it turns out, Nvidia, which is now the world's largest company, valued at over $5 trillion. According to the Zionism Observer, there are at least 92 Israelis on LinkedIn who listed both Nvidia and Unit 8200. Now, I don't know if those are all active employees of Nvidia, but at least they show a common alumni. Some may be currently working at Nvidia. Some may have worked previously at Nvidia and prior had served in Unit 8200. But this is why. Nvidia is just days away from building Israel's largest tech campus ever. According to Yaakov Kvint, director of the Israeli Land Authority, the deal with the tech giant to build a massive campus in Israel's north will be signed in the next day or so. It'll be something the likes of which has never been seen before in Israel. 160,000 square meters to house approximately 8,000 workers. That's about 30% larger than their Silicon Valley campus. Horrible. This isn't the only investment the world's most valuable company is making in what Dan Senior calls the startup nation. In southern Israel, Nvidia is tripling the size of its R&D center there in Beersheba. In November, they reached 5,000 Israeli employees, making Israel its largest R&D center outside the United States. So, Nvidia is a major proponent, supporter, and advocate for Zionism. Keep that in mind. They're also the ones that are fueling all the data centers and funding all the lobbying on behalf of it. And again, you've got this circular thing with OpenAI and Nvidia and Microsoft and Amazon, where they're all just passing money back and forth and back and forth. Golden Monarch going crazy. And Golden Monarch, to his credit, was talking to me about Jensen Huang like a month or two or longer ago about how he was like a staunch Zionist. And it doesn't really surprise me because of all the tech people that are coming out of Israel. Like, that's what they're cheaper and they're sustaining and growing that industry, not realizing that they're letting the fox into the fucking hen house. This will all be turned against them in the end. Fuck Israel. And fuck Nvidia. Next. Now, this was from back in November. And I've talked before about the infiltration that Israel and Israeli media and the campaign that they had set forth to infiltrate American media and specific American groups that were being targeted. So this is an article in the Palestine News Network website, english.pnn.ps. I've never heard of Palestine News Network before this. They were shared in the Israel-Palestine News website. From churches to ChatGPT, Israeli contracts worth millions aim to influence U.S. public opinion. And again, I know I've talked about a lot of these before, but I wanted to bring this one because this is like a nice little rehash overview summary of all of the, not all of, but a lot of the efforts that have happened to coordinate Hasbara propaganda. All right. Now, this is why I brought this also. The projects are funded through the German company, Havas Media. This is to give Israel a layer of disconnect. Well, it's not us, it's Havas. Who hired Havas to do the propaganda? Havas serves as the executive intermediary. The documents indicate that Israel has paid over $100 million through this channel since 2018 already to promote and finance media campaigns in the U.S. Now they've targeted $750 million for 2026, a 5x. The largest of these contracts was signed in August with Clock Tower X, which is owned by Brad Parscale that ran the Trump digital campaign for 2016 and 2020. Okay, the $6 million 4-month deal provides strategic consulting and planning and the execution of a comprehensive campaign in the U.S. to combat anti-Semitism. They're not combating anti-Semitism. The campaign is to conflate anti-Semitism with anti-Zionism. According to contract details filed with the U.S. DOJ, the company must produce at least 100 core materials per month, including videos, audio clips, designs, and texts, along with 5,000 derivative versions monthly, which they use AI for, aiming for 50 million monthly views. About 80% of the content targets young Americans on TikTok, Instagram, and YouTube, and I would say 75% of those views are paid bot AI slop. in order to influence the other people and make it seem like they're much larger than they are, allegedly. Focusing on conservative church audiences, which again we've talked about, but Haaretz reported that much of the campaign's messaging is distributed through Salem Media Network, a conservative Christian media conglomerate owning more than 200 radio stations and websites across the U.S., okay, where you have Parscale again appointed this year as their network's chief strategy officer. How convenient. So first, Parscale gets money for this entity, Clock Tower. Then he's getting money through Salem Media Network. All right. Though the focus on Christian audiences is unusual, no, it's not, because of the Christian Zionism element. Surveys by the Pew Research Center between 2022 and 25 show a steep decline in support for Israel among American conservatives. Amazing how blowing up innocent fucking Palestinian kids might do that. Negative opinions rose from 42% in 2022 to 53% this year, including among Republicans under 50. Again, genocide will have that effect on a population, especially the ones that are on TikTok that are paying attention and don't watch the evening news where they whitewash it and dismiss it or omit it completely. Among young Democrats, negative views of Israel climbed to 71%. Again, they don't like murdering kids, up from 62% 3 years ago, reflecting a widening divide in attitudes towards Israel, even with the traditionally pro-Israel conservative base. Conservatives don't like murdering babies either, motherfuckers. A 2024 report by Tel Aviv University's Center for the Study of the United States identified a similar trend among young evangelicals who've become more critical of Israel, a shift attributed to images of destruction in Gaza and the waning impact of traditional Israeli PR. You mean Hasbara, lying, bullshit, made up fear porn? You mean that's not working anymore because people see dead bodies every day and dead babies every day and starving children every day and freezing children every day and soggy tents and flooded out stuff where they have no access to toilets or sewage or running water or electricity? Hunting worshipers inside churches. Okay, but not like you would think. They're geo-targeting people. Another campaign financed by Israel's foreign ministry was conducted through Show Faith by Works, owned by Republican consultant and evangelical activist Chad Schnitzker. I have to be careful there. With a budget exceeding $3 million, again, a drop in the bucket for these motherfuckers, the campaign sought to raise Christian awareness against what it termed Palestinian support for terrorism. There has been no terrorism of anywhere since October 7th, 2023, and that wasn't even terrorism because the definition of you cannot commit an act of terror in an area where you are imprisoned already, where the guards were pulled off the wall that morning and it was a forced intelligence failure, where the IDF murdered hundreds of Israeli citizens that day. But again, terrorism. Focusing largely on targeting churches and Christian organizations in the Western U.S. Like Utah, for example, like where Charlie Kirk was killed. Why? Because Charlie Kirk allegedly was starting to question Israel, at least a slight bit amount, apparently. I don't know how much. He had said some horrible things about Palestinian people. He had said some horrible things about other people, but there were a group of right-wing Christians that were starting to question, why are we supporting Israel blindly? Documents show the use of, like I said, geofencing technology, setting precise digital perimeters around churches and Christian colleges in California, Arizona, Nevada, and Colorado to track worshipers and later direct ads to them. Their target audience was estimated at 8 million churchgoers and 4 million Christian students, which means My guess is that they did this using an app, which then they made people allow location targeting to be enabled, not realizing who was actually getting access to that data, and the fact that they would then be served ads later on based on the fact that they went to a church and installed that fucking app. But the FTC will have nothing to say about that. I remember I was in the car business and we heard about geo-targeting years ago. So that, like, if I worked at a car dealership, I could literally geo-fence my competitor's dealership and serve a coupon via text message to one of the somebody that showed up within a certain radius of their store. Frightening shit. And this was a decade ago. Despite privacy concerns, the Israeli Foreign Ministry told Haaretz that claims about geofencing or influencer payments were false and part of a coordinated disinformation campaign against Israel. No, they never do that. They also did it at Charlie Kirk's funeral, by the way. The ministry said that its activities so far were limited to exhibitions and digital installations showing the atrocities of October 7th. So people who are already primed to be propagandized, you then further propagandized because you were lying about what happened on October 7th to begin with. There were no rapes. You didn't talk about the IDF shooting rocket fire at people and tank fire at people, and you certainly are still trying to talk about beheaded babies. Insane. Then you have the Hollywood celebrities, and INN News covered this a couple of weeks ago. Drafts of the campaign listed potential celebrity partners such as Chris Pratt and Jon Voight and Tim Tebow and Steph Curry, though it remains unclear whether they were actually contacted. They were targeted. Plans also included developing educational materials for pastors and organizing a traveling VR exhibition called the October 7th Experience to be displayed in churches and universities. And they brought all those pastors to Israel 2 weeks ago to start this, to lay that groundwork, I guarantee. Then we have this week, they also announced further influencing ChatGPT. A notable clause in the Clock Tower X contract refers to search and language operation aimed not only at shaping traditional search engine results, but also at influencing conversational outputs on ChatGPT and AI platforms such as Claude by steering language pathways related to Israel. So now they're feeding Hasbara to the slop, to the AI, so that when AI looks to give you like the median of all data and a total sample set, it will be forced to include that slop. According to Haaretz, this marks the first known public attempt by a state to influence AI chat systems and shape their political narratives. Then we've got Project Esther, which I know Dissent in Bloom also talked about extensively. Influencer-based messaging. In a related move, all right, the Israeli government signed another contract with Bridges Partners, owned by consultants Yair Levy and Uri Steinberg, both former officials in Israel's tourism ministry. They only feed their own. Valued at around $1 million, the deal aims to enhance cultural exchange between the U.S. and Israel through influencer-driven content. They're basically buying off content creators. The initiative, again titled the Esther Project, employs up to 20 influencers to post up to 30 pieces of content monthly across Instagram, TikTok, YouTube, and Twitter. Are these the $7,000 posts? Sounds like it, from fees ranging from several thousand to tens of thousands of dollars, depending on how big a platform that you have. The documents mention that one of the beneficiaries is a media advisor who previously worked with Netanyahu and the families of Israeli hostages. Remember that all the hostages have been returned, at least the living ones. There have been several that are still under rubble that they can't get to.
Who are these people?
Thank you to whoever just hooked us up there. Oz the Boomer, thank you, brother. I don't know why that thing is slid over there. It shouldn't be. Slide that over here and fix that so that it comes down the right way. All right. Then we have their tech war room, which again, they're bragging about this stuff. But it's anti-Semitic to accuse them of coordinating this stuff, right? Of influence campaigns. According to Haaretz, these contracts form part of a broader Israeli strategy to deploy AI in influence operations. Internal documents reveal a plan named Project Max, developed under the Voices of Israel division of the Diaspora Affairs Ministry. Literally, they have a propaganda division of their government aimed at combating delegitimization of Israel through AI and big data analytics. The noticers are noticing, and we can't allow that, so we have to counter that with $750 million of propaganda. The plan envisions a technological war room equipped with monitoring, publishing, and activation systems, combining human influencers and automated bots programmed to generate pro-Israel propaganda. Holy shit. Haaretz noted that earlier attempts to launch such bots suffered technical failures that produced awkward or contradictory content. I remember we covered one of those AI bots that turned on Israel at one point, but said that current efforts to reflect a more sophisticated digital propaganda strategy integrating AI tools, influencers, and sponsored media campaigns, douchebags like Tim Pool and Batya Unger-Sargon and other larger platform people like Patrick Bet-David. Fuck all these propagandist douchebag people. All right. And finally, I've got one other thing. Dealing with the chat GPT, Ryan Rosbiani, and you should be following him if you're not on Twitter. Israel signs a $6 million training contract for ChatGPT to be even more pro-Israel because they weren't already. A coordinated influence campaign is now targeting AI outputs and online conversations about Gaza. A U.S. firm was hired, as we said, to shape GPT-style responses and digital framing in Israel's favor, moving beyond ads and into answers. At least 80% of the material is tailored for Gen Z across TikTok, Instagram, YouTube, podcasts, and social. Again, we talked about Parscale is running this. The campaign is built to generate 50 million impressions every month in the U.S. They don't even necessarily care who it's influencing. They want to be able to claim that number because then it's influencing somebody because of the volume. They don't even care. Contract language explicitly calls for delivering GPT framing results. As I had pointed out from inside that article there, this isn't messaging, it's narrative control built into AI. It was always Chat GIPTI, Generative Israel Propaganda Text Interface. And I can't go too far down in the comments or you're going to get something that really is antiseptic. But fuck Netanyahu, fuck Israel, fuck OpenAI, and all these propagandist douchebags. And that's the end of our Fuck Israel segment for the night, fam. We made it. Thank you. Thanks for sticking with me for it. Algorithms are anti-Semitic, apparently. Even though they're mostly programmed by Unit 8200 guys, or at least overseen and influenced after they're programmed by low-cost Indian and other programmers, Chinese and other H-1Bs. Scumbag is my new favorite word, Lady Alex M. It is a fun one to use. Again, thank you to Oz the Boomer for the $5. So tip your streamers if you can. We appreciate that. Oz, you are sneaky, staying up late. And Oz and Shanda did a show Saturday night, which was the last Beauty and the Boomer of the year. We're going to talk about Shanda a little later on tonight. She is at Red Hutch right now, undergoing treatment. I think she's going to be staying with Amber if they don't bust her out. And we love Shanda. So before we keep going and we get to the Substack story, which I'm still looking forward to doing. Okay, support independent media because we need it more than ever. Like I tell everyone. The ways to do that at INN, and we love all the people on that board. Thank you so much for supporting independent media. Cash App, $, Indie News Network, ko-fi.com/Indie News Network. PayPal.me/Indie News Network. Do that as friends and family if you can. Patreon.com/Indie News Network. Our website is IndieNewsNow.com. There's a section there to leave a tip via Stripe on the Keep the Media Free. And then over at Substack, you can subscribe monthly or annually at either IndieMediaToday.com or for the network at INNNewsletter.com. We are co-founders of Indie News Network, where there are more than a dozen shows weekly, and I send out a weekly newsletter summarizing and linking to everything that the network has put out throughout the week. Subscribe over at INNNewsletter.com, please. I put a ton of time into that. I will tell you all, I love you. I thank you so much for supporting me and supporting this network and supporting this endeavor. Support independent media because we need it more than ever, fam. Have a good night, and we will see you real soon. No! We just fucking lost the stream!
I guess this isn't such an awful place. Is that what you want